Good morning, guten Morgen. Welcome everybody to Chess Dojo's coverage of the Weissenhaus Grand Slam, part of the Freestyle Chess Grand Slam Tour. Today we enter the semifinals. That means there are 4 players still competing for the victory in this Grand Slam. There are 4 other players who are still competing for 5th through 8th place, so they're playing for their matches. Going to do the best they can, even if first place is no longer possible. Hi, Rafael. Wow. Asher was just sitting there quickly refreshing nonstop. That's nice. We've got different first moves already between Keymer and Fabi. The players have been doing this thing where they work together a moment, where they talk together for, maybe 10 minutes before the games start. And I think that's one of the reasons that the players with the white pieces have often been playing the same moves up till now. For the first, 1 or 2 moves, we've seen that a few times, right? That they start off with the same moves. So it seems like in general they've managed to convince each other, agree together on the best start in most of the positions here this week. And I often don't think it's really clear what the best move is. And today, the players are not agreeing for once, with Fabi and Vincent playing different first moves. Francois is here. Yeah, that's pretty soon. Good morning, Houseline and Muhahas. Do you have your jumper, Houseline? There are several rules of thumb for the openings in 960, absolutely. One of the first things that we do in 960, or that many of us do, or that I recommend a lot of people do, is scan the board we're going to scan the board to see if there's any undefended pawn. H7, G7, F7. If you use my approach, you'll find that the B7 pawn is undefended. That's one of the first things I check for, because often there's some kind of tactical first move where you make a move and you threaten, queen B7, bishop B7, something like that. So that's like the first thing I do, just to have tactical awareness. So here, for example, I would be aware that, knight B3, knight B6, knight C5 might be dangerous. Right? I want to immediately be aware of that. The second thing you can look for, as Skibix is already saying, you can look for a spot that's only defended by the king, if there is such a spot. That would be like F7 in normal chess. So that's the first thing that you need to do, and that's because you need to assume that in Fischer Random you're a little bit of a beginner. And what does a beginner need to watch out for in chess? Like, what is one of the first things that a beginner needs to learn about? Is kind of like how to avoid getting scholars mated, right? Bishop C4, Queen H5. In all seriousness, when I started playing chess, I once went to a camp the city was holding. It was just sort of a one-day thing in the summer, and people were playing chess there, and somebody scholars mated me for the entire day, from morning till afternoon. They scholars mated me the entire day. I just kept asking them to play again, and thinking that I could stop it, and I spent an entire day just getting scholars mated. So that is one of the first things we need to figure out in Fischer Random is where is the scholars mate, and do we see how to stop it? Step one, basic as it may be. Once that's out of the way, my second rule of thumb I would suggest is think about where the bishops are going to come out. Because in general, the knights, and I hesitate as I say it, as I suddenly realize that they're both in the corner in this board. But the knights are usually more flexible about how they come out, right? They'll have 2 or 3 options, and you don't need to move any pawns to move the knights. So if you want to play knight g3, you could do it with or without the g-pawn moving. The knights are not as picky, not as tricky at the very beginning. But the bishops are often going to tell you which pawns you need to move in the opening, right? Like, for example, in normal chess, sometimes people say it's a waste of time to move any pawn that's not a center pawn. You see what I mean? Because if you play your E and your D pawns, you'll be able to develop your bishops, and those pawns will fight for the center. So why would you move any pawn other than your E or your D pawn? Right? Like, what's the incentive? So, similarly here, you want to figure out, which pawns do you probably want to move to get your bishops into the game, and then you're going to not want to waste too much time with the non-bishop pawns, perhaps, right? Although both of these games have started out... Oh, no, not Fabi. Fabi started out by opening a bishop, yeah. But Vincent started out with g4, which does not help either of these bishops. So it's not a move that would have been super high on my list, honestly, as very first move here. When I look at this position, one of the first things that occurs to me, Rafal, is that if I moved, this pawn and then this pawn to c3 or c4, both my bishops could be happy. Once I see that idea, I think I would like to castle over here. So, maybe grab space with the pawns in the center / queen side. And then see if eventually I can actually castle my king away from there. Although it's very easy to castle my king over here. You see white can castle on the very first move in this starting position. A useful trick for avoiding getting smothered mated on b2. Just to have that up your sleeve. So, like in normal chess, it can be good to take over the center with your pawns. Therefore, like d4 is kind of the most aggressive move you could play here, I think. Like e4 in normal chess, right? We put our pawn there in the middle of the board. It's undefended. And we've got good chances of being able to follow up with c4, right? So if your opponent played symmetrically with you, you could play a queen's gambit here. It would cost you, time with your rook. Then your opponent castles, threatening this pawn. Knight b3, e5. Feels a little uncomfortable until you spot the winning move, bishop b4. Oh, wow. Black played too aggressively in my little spar against myself there. Oops. Oops, Black. There's a little tactic for you. And we got to really watch out for these. Remember what I said about remembering that we're kind of noobs, right? We have to watch out. We have to watch out. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an intro to this. format, to this variant here. And now we'll start to get into the games, and we've got another great question from chat that I want to answer, which is Asanda asking what my predictions are for today's games. So let's get the positions on the board real quick that we've got so far. G4, knight G6. Here, Fabi starts playing on both sides of the board. F3, F5, C4. So at some point, this knight may well come to G3, and Sindarov will have to decide, am I defending this pawn or advancing it further? And the other thing we want to remind everyone at the beginning of every round is maybe how castling works. So anybody who's joining us today for the first time, one example of castling we have right here in the starting position. The king and rook can just switch positions. Essentially, the rule for castling in Fischer Random is your king has to go to either G1 or C1. Like in normal chess, when you're finished castling, or when you finish castling, your position will look like in normal chess. It may start from some different squares, but it'll end up with either a king G1, rook C1, or with a king C1, rook D1, or king G1, rook F1. The funniest thing about this position, almost, is that anytime white or black castles, the rooks aren't going to move in this game. If you move like this bishop and queen, then you can just move your king to G1 and the rook stands still. Oh, and on this side the rook does move. King C1, the rook goes to D1. Okay. I see, even I got it slightly wrong while trying to explain it in a slow and simple way. All right. Let's talk about where we are in this tournament, okay? So, in this tournament, we start off with 10 players. They played a 9-round rapid round robin against each other on Friday and Saturday. 5 rounds Saturday, 4 games Sunday. I think that was mildly exhausting because of the emotional ups and downs. To play 5 rapid games in a day, I think, was a little bit much. These top players aren't used to playing the kind of grueling schedules that you have in American Opens. So I think it was a bit much for them, 5 rapid games. And the top 8 moved into a sort of top bracket to play for the Grand Slam and the top prize of $200,000. The bottom 2 were immediately sort of eliminated from contention for first. They played a 9th through 10th place match against each other over the last 2 days, which Levon Aronian won, and now he and Vladimir Fedoseev are done playing for the week. Okay, they finished 9th place, Aronian, 10th place, Fedoseev. And over the last 2 days, they played quarterfinals, the other 8 players. In those quarterfinals, Magnus defeated Nodirbek Abdusattorov 2-0 in very commanding fashion. The first game, he developed kind of a positional advantage, whipped it into a very quick and vicious attack, and actually scored basically a checkmate in 23 moves or so. The second game, Abdusattorov tried to seize the initiative. Magnus accepted a pawn sacrifice, defended fairly easily with a bunch of trades, and then showed his endgame virtuosity to trade one advantage for another, back and forth, until he reemerged with his extra pawn in a rook endgame, which he converted. So dominant 2-0 from Magnus, top form. And for all that Jesse goes into his little, hey, Magnus, buddy, routines or suggests that Magnus may be losing it, if you look at Magnus's play at this event, you get a real sense that this is what Magnus wants to be doing and that he's having a great time playing here. Another match that was decided 2-0 was Fabiano Caruana against Gukesh. Fabi has done nothing wrong, but in that match, what I would emphasize is that Gukesh played terribly, whereas in this other match, I'm emphasizing that Magnus played brilliantly. Fabi did nothing wrong, but basically he just had to collect what Gukesh was dropping, which was everything. So Fabi won 2-0 as well. That left Vincent Keymer, the outsider by a classical FIDE rating of these top 8. Well, along with Javokir Sindarov. Keymer was the choice of Firouzja, who'd finished in first in the Rapid. He got to choose his opponent. He chose Keymer. Played terribly in the first game, was beaten by Keymer. Yesterday, very competitive game. Firouzja played well, put Keymer under a lot of pressure. Keymer defended like a beast, and eventually even emerged in a position where he was winning because Firouzja was over-pressing, and Keymer found some way to steer the game into a draw to seal that match. That left the closest match, Sindarov versus Nakamura. Sindarov, a qualifier, a wild card, a newish member of the 2700 club in classical chess. He tied for first place in the Rapid with Firouzja, ahead of all the top players, only losing the last round. In fact, he was leading by a full point in that Rapid tournament till he lost in the last round. And he tied his match 1-1 with Nakamura with 2 draws. Both games where Sindarov was on the ropes in the end game, struggling to stay alive. But survive he did, and then he beat Naka 2-0 in the Rapid tiebreaks to earn his spot here in the semifinals. And that gives you the current top 4. I don't know how obvious my standings are here right now. These matches are all 0-0 because they're just kicking off today. But hopefully, if you need a reminder of who's playing who, you can see there's Fabiano versus Sindarov. Sorry about this 2 next to his name. There's no points yet in the semifinals. Keymer also shouldn't have any points next to his name. I'm going to go over here and set up our eval bars for today. Say white starts off better on every board probably. Here we've got Keymer, Carlsen. We've got Fabi versus Sindarov. We've got, I think, Alireza is playing not Gukesh or Naka, but Nodirbek. And then we've got Gukesh against Naka. All right. So that's what's happened so far. What should we expect to happen next? Let's see if we've got any other moves here. Knight b3 after 9 minutes from Vincent. A pretty simple move, but already, there's some concern that this f4 square is going to be a little weak here. Having played the Grob, you weaken these squares. Then e3 would keep the knight out of f4, but that's not a very good move for this bishop on e1, right? It's not looking forward to white playing e3. And, white's more likely to play c3 at some point, which also doesn't go well with e3. So, say already there are some seeds of not of discoordination necessarily of the pieces, but some seeds of positional weakness for Vincent, assuming he develops all his pieces somewhat harmoniously. I think his pawn structure might leave some real holes, something really to be desired here in white's position. So I think it's already off to a not nice start. Maybe I'll even go out on a real limb and say that black is already equal with Keymer's approach, which I don't love. f3, f5, c4, knight b6 from Sindarov, inviting the move c5. Which I would strongly consider as Fabi, actually. I mean, that has that Alireza defense feel, right? Let's have a quick look, just a very brief look. Let's imagine the knight goes here. Oh, wait, it could also go to c4 because of that b2 square, right? But white has a nice move then. Queen d4. Now, if black has a nice move, I'll have to revise my thinking here. Okay, I see one idea for black here that might be interesting. This move, with the idea of like b3 or any other attack on the knight, playing e5 and kicking that queen. But so as white, I would probably try bishop takes pawn. Now if you kick my queen, scholars mate! Ha! Now I'm not the only one to have been scholars mated. We can castle with a1 and b1 undeveloped. Yes, Rafal. Castling is possible in the very starting position here. And Skibix is saying, that they checked that first Naka versus Sindarov endgame, which looked like 100% like it had to be winning for Naka, and the computer demonstrated a subtle error from Naka, confirming that Naka was maybe winning, but it was something where even seeing the computer line, you can't understand why the right move is the right move and the wrong move is the wrong move, huh? All right, let's retract this ugly checkmate from the board for those who are offended by it. So bishop f7, bishop f5, black can castle to avoid that checkmate. Now I'd consider like bishop g3 maybe to try to dissuade e5. Maybe it can still be played as a pawn sack. However, let's have a look. This position looks fine-ish for black despite the pawn stack, right? We're only down one, not two pawns. On the other hand, there's stuff for white too, right? Because like white could castle king side here. You guys like that? King just sort of whoop, heading across. And then we can play to attack this king, right? You know, chuck some pawns up the board. Yeah, hard to say, because this bishop still needs to come out, so black's going to need to do something with the pawns around their own king here, maybe, right? Like maybe this move. And I have to keep this defended, but now I've got a hook to play b5 on. Meh. Who knows? It's Fischer random. It's tricky. I feel like he's going to be a little scared to play c5 as Fabi. Because that is pretty risky, that situation. On the other hand, if you don't play c5, I mean, the guy will still play knight c4, right? You don't really want to play bishop d3. I suppose you could, though, because this bishop can come out in this direction here. Okay, let me try something else. I played c5, knight d5, no, knight c4, queen d4, bishop f7, bishop h4 to attack this square and prevent castling queenside. No, there's just knight g6. That fails for sure. But that shows me that e5's a risky move from black, right? So if I develop my bishop here for white, And black hits my queen with e5. I can give check. Oh no, there's g5, protected by the queen. Pushing everyone back. Queen c3. She's got a square where she keeps b2 defended. Knight's under attack. And black collapses here. Oh, good analysis, David. I think this line is a critical line. Now, you may not be familiar with this kind of calculation on move 3 from normal chess, right? But to me, this would be the equivalent in normal chess of like taking some game like this and calculating like e4, knight f6, e5, knight e4. Does anybody know this line? This is like the Alireza line that doesn't work. It's the reason why the knight goes to d5 in the Alireza. But to figure out whether the Alireza is even playable for black, you have to check if the knight can go to one of these two squares. We know if it goes to g8 that black's position is not very good, right? So like they go knight g8, and then there's this line c4. You see whether or not you can trap that knight. You know, a4, a5. And similarly, knight e4, there's this cool line. You go d4, cutting off the knight's retreat to g5, right? And you're threatening f3. So now the line goes, you know, like e6, preparing queen h4 check. And yeah, I'll fix it in a second, Burak. I just need to make a point in this position really quickly, and then we'll go to a correct board. You know, the calculation, you may or may not ever have done this, but the reason the knight doesn't go to e4 is based on this calculation here. You know, whether or not we can play f3. I think, let's see if I can even remember it now. I did this long ago. Queen g4, f5. Huh, now I don't even remember it. I spent a while calculating this as a kid to really understand what's going on. Anyway, this here is the kind of calculation that we are now doing over down on my other board about this knight on c4. And it's the kind of calculation that Fabi now has to do from scratch to decide whether or not to push c5 here after knight b6. And he successfully did the calculation and did play c5. I mean, the fact that I calculated it one way and Fabi did as well makes me suspect that we got it right, just because, you know, it's like you told two different people to multiply all the numbers between 10 and 17, and 5 minutes later they come back. If they give two different answers, you're pretty sure that somebody got it wrong and maybe both got it wrong. But if they give the same answer, it gives you the sense like, well, maybe they got it. So c5 from Fabi, I highly approve of just sticking it to this knight b6 move if this queen d4 move works out, which I think it probably did. And then we get knight to d5 from Sindarov. But look at Fabi's clock. Look at Sindarov's clock, right? The truth is that if you had to play chess without knowing any opening theory, then, you know, when you faced the Alireza defense before you played e5, you might have to calculate for like 10 minutes to decide whether or not to play e5. And your opponent might have to calculate for 10 minutes before they played knight f6 to decide, you know, can I attack this pawn? Or do I need to first play a move like d6 or e5, you know, before I can attack the pawn? Right? Like, you would have that calculation burden that you're seeing Fabi and Sindarov undertake here, right? These calculations are like 10 minutes worth of work as Carlsen plays the move I expected here, e5, you know, preparing to use the f4 square for the knight, staking a claim in the center. Good start for him. But he's also already spent 15 minutes thinking right here. Merles points out they've seen a whole class give the same wrong answer. It's true. It's true. Fabi plus me is not a lot of answers. Far short of a full class. But one of the differences, or one detail here, is that Fabi is, one of the, 5 leading scholars or whatever. One of the top 5 mathematicians in the world, you would say, for example, in my math example. So if one of the top 5 mathematicians in the world was one of the ones who came back and gave you a certain answer, it would also add to your conviction. But we could totally have got it wrong. And knight c4 could have some brilliant resource for black that we've missed. But there's some higher chance we're right than we're wrong. Fabi plus me. Yes, absolutely, Asher. I didn't get into those lines yet, but in all the positions where the knight was on c4, when I had attacked it successfully and put black on the defensive, let's say with queen c3, before they lose, there is always the move b5 or d5. These moves are just not super promising for black in these positions, so I didn't dot my I's and cross my T's in the analysis. I just kind of knew they wouldn't be very good for black. For example, I'll show you b5 real quick. We could take en passant, and then if they take back with the knight, we have bishop a6 trapping a rook, or queen e5 taking a pawn. Right, doesn't look super promising for black. The b pawn is pretty valuable in these positions because, it decides whether or not you can castle and the king's safety, and really you need to move the other pawns to let this bishop out, not the b pawn. Also against b5 or d5, white can simply take, potentially, and grab e5. It's maybe a little bit more interesting before e5 gets played, you could say, because there won't be the pawn on e5 hanging. But I had calculated that here there'd be bishop takes, simply winning the piece. I just didn't show every single variation. And here, again, I was thinking that taking should be pretty good for white. If knight b6, there's bishop a6. Other move would be cb6, defending the knight here. And I hadn't noticed that now b3 bishop e5 would be potentially interesting. But let's just say that here bishop f5 looks quite good for white. You no longer have this queenside castling resource because you can't put your king on the open file anymore. So anyway, there's more details to it. That's not every single variation, Asher. Yeah, you can try and do it with the queen on c3 as well. Again, white could take on c4 and take your e-pawn. Or they could play b3 and win the knight, and the knight still needs a square. And the queen c3 line here could be b3, and your knight still needs a square. And now there's only this kind of unpleasant square here. Both these pawns are hanging. So, we could in fact go a little bit deeper, and I would guess that Fabi did go a little deeper than I did for you. But basically it's starting to hit that point where we have a pretty strong indication of what's coming. And look at that. White sees a space, black sees a space, and this knight gets kicked somewhere. And this game here is off to a very entertaining start, this opening. It's an immediate skirmish opening, whereas Magnus and Vincent have more of a positional opening right now. You know, more of like a, say like a Dutch defense, but honestly it's more of a grob. It's just a grob. Fabi goes knight e4. In this position, Fabi had to very seriously consider e4, kicking the knight, but I guess Sindarov had seen that Fabi wouldn't be able to just kick his knight around. This would be very, very bad for black if they were retreating, honestly, right? Because the bishop's defending this pawn, white plays d4, takes over the whole center, right? But I assume Sindarov had seen, and then Fabi saw as well, that there's basically this check. And if you play g4, there's rook f1. You know, and your king gets forced all the way up to here. And then, I don't know, maybe even knight a2. Nope, not knight a2. Oh my god, that would be too much. That would be way too much if we went knight a2 as black. Checkmate, by the way, you cannot castle queenside out of checkmate. I've been wanting to point out this rule. You cannot castle out of check here. Okay, but we don't have to take the pawn on a2 as black. At this point, he could just say, you know, job well done, play knight c6, or maybe a5. And, you know, black's up a pawn and white's king is not correctly placed. I know there's some differences between Fischer random and normal, but one of them is not that your king is well placed on c3. In fact, one of the goals of Fischer random, one of the things that I think about at the beginning of a game, in addition to how are my bishops going to get out, is there a particular area of the board where I'd be happier to have my king? Left side, center, or right side? Queen side, as we call it. Though I haven't seen the queen start on the queen side this entire week. The king's always been on the queen side and the queen on the king side so far this entire week. But I often, one of the first considerations that I have in the starting position is often also like, is there a preference for which side I would like to castle, or am I not castling? Okay, so white couldn't play f4, so Fabi plays knight g3, tempoing the pawn. And I said this from the very first move, that Sindarov at some point was going to have to decide whether he wants to defend this pawn with e6 or g6, or whether he wants to grab space. I had an inclination he would prefer to grab space. c6 creates a rotational symmetry in the moves they've played. The board starts off with an axial symmetry, right, between white's position and black's position. It's kind of mirrored if you flip it. But these two players have now managed, hilariously, to create a rotational symmetry in the moves they've played, right? If you just look at the knights and the pawns that have moved, you could rotate them around the central pawn here, and that would be the symmetry. Whoa, cool. And now, boom! Queen into the center of the board. One interesting feature about Fischer Random Chess is it's revising a little bit the role of the queen. In normal chess, people tell you not to bring out your queen too soon. I don't do that. I actually cringe when people use that rule and other too simple rules when it should be more specific. But yes, as Eli says, copy that, Sindarov. Fabi probably. You'd have to play queen e5 somehow. Actually, he'd be happy to if it were legal to play that move. It would be a very strong move here, challenging the queen's position, but she just can't get there. So basically, in chess, including Fischer Random Chess, you don't want your queen giving a bunch of tempi to your opponent's pieces so they get to better squares. That's why you sometimes don't play queen to d4, but as I was explaining yesterday with this variation here on the messed up board, you guys know the Scotch game is played by white up to the World Championship level. Kasparov's played in World Championship matches. And black never trades on d4 in order to tell white, ha ha ha, you're a beginner. You put your queen in the center, right? Why not? Because the queen's well placed here the moment there isn't a knight that can come to c6, right? Whether or not there's a knight to c6 changes whether or not queen d4 is a good move. So, down below here, there's no knight c6, right? We see the queen often great in the center, right? Fabi is potentially getting kicked by the move e5, yes. And if so, what is his intention? I mean, part of it is that he's saying that here e5 is a move that weakens d6 and doesn't help these pieces. You know, I would think if there's a refutation for what he's doing, it would actually look more like knight g6, bishop e5, right? But on e5, I would suspect he's heading over to the queen side so he can look at these two pawns, reminiscent of the best game we've seen all week for sure, Magnus's first game against Nodirbek, where Magnus made an effort in the opening to get his queen into the center and then transferred it over to the queen side where he'd spotted some weak squares to start attacking. Bishop h4 also in the air. Yes, perhaps. Yeah, there's this g5 move that we always have to watch out for, folks, right? If we're going for bishop h4. And then the queen and the bishop are attacked. And as Jake says, seeing basic tactics is hard in the morning. While also seeing basic tactics in a position that you're completely unfamiliar with can be difficult. However, I invite folks to just try to open your brain to Fischer random and the kind of opening calculations that come up and trying to calculate this position here for white, right? What are our candidate moves, and is this looking good or bad for white here after g5? Asanda asking about d4. I think d4 is the move I would have probably played on the first move in this particular starting position that Fabi and Keymer had here. Keep calculating, folks. All right. Good question before b5. First, we're going to get people's answers on this tactic here. So, if white moved a retreat here of the bishop, they would lose the queen. If we tried to move our queen somewhere else to make some kind of threat, there's no threat good enough. Black will take the bishop, and we can't really get into anything too exciting over here. So the only really important candidate moves after g5 are bishop takes and knight takes. Bishop takes, loses a piece. Black takes, we take, and black takes. And sometimes you'll miscalculate this as being a queen trade, but it's important to know that black captured a bishop with their queen and white captured nothing with their queen. So white's lost a bishop for a pawn in this situation, right? However, White has a fantastical resource here, which I believe is completely winning, which is knight takes g5 instead. And after knight takes g5, if black takes on d4, you have another beautiful checkmate. And I want folks to take in the fact that we're at move 6 of this game, and we've already found 3 or 4 different checkmates in our analysis, right? I remember for sure we played a queen takes d7 checkmate scholar's mate with the bishop and queen in one line. We also had a line where white's king was dying on c3, but with knight a2 check, bishop a2, queen a2, black allowed queen to f8, back rank checkmate. And now we've got this gorgeous specimen here. It's a double check, so the black king can't go to c7, the knight can't be captured, the bishop can't be blocked. So, and in this position, if black takes the knight, then of course this move here is check. Black has no time to capture white's queen. So after knight g5, black's best move would be something miserable like, I don't know, knight e7 or something like that, and white's queen could head on to b4 or a4 or somewhere quite happily, and white is better. Oh man, for a second I thought I could still give a smothered mate because my queen pins this pawn. However, black's queen is on that square. Okay. Oh yeah, or as Merles points out, black has one other important candidate move here, which is queenside castling to avoid that knight move. Yeah, that's probably better because it keeps the knight in the center of the board. White's queen will move on, and the game will go on, but white will have netted a pawn with that knight takes g5 tactic. Okay, so queen d4 has been played, and Sindarov has not yet played a move. I think knight g6, looking to put a piece on e5, makes sense. But bear in mind, if we go knight g6, and white plays who knows what, like develops a knight maybe. I'm not thinking too hard on this move. Bishop e5, queen a4. We just need to be aware that, like, as we tempo the queen, we won't necessarily win a tempo because then the pawn on a7 is hanging, right? So we just have to have a plan in mind as black before we play the bishop e5 move, right? Okay, so here's the position, Sindarov thinking, and now we're going to briefly address the question from b4, b5 about format. b4, b5 says, what's with this this sort of format that's kind of newish or different compared to other tournaments in terms of, you know, the rapid phase, then the 2-game knockout matches. Why not just have the players play a normal, simple round robin? It would be more natural. If you're going to do a knockout, isn't it better to just actually let the losers drop out rather than making them stick around and play? I actually have the opposite opinion on that, but I'm reading all that out so that everyone can, on Twitch, can properly hear b4, b5's opinion and have it presented properly. From my perspective, knockout is an interesting format to investigate in chess instead of round robins, because to win, you have to, you know, defeat your opponent. There's no collusion possible. There's no somebody taking a quick draw to rest and it being favorable for them and their opponent and disfavorable for the other competitors who are tiring themselves out. It's really like your fate is always in your own hands. You can't ever get a situation like in a round robin where somebody beats the bottom 2 players and then finishes ahead of somebody that they've only drawn with and that they've never beaten. Like, for example, in the candidates tournament this last year, everybody knows that I'm a fan of Gukesh and that I think he was the deserved winner. But from a certain perspective, Gukesh did not manage to beat any of his main competitors, other candidates, right? He didn't beat Nepo or Fabi, most importantly. I don't think he beat Hikaru either. What he did was he beat this qualifier from the World Cup, right? Whose name is almost even like slipping my mind. He's so far out of the top players of the world. Wow. So, he beat the last place player, Nijat it was, Abbasov. Yeah, I met a different Abbasov before I met Nijat many years ago. The second Grandmaster Abbasov from Azerbaijan, I think. So he beat Nijat Abbasov 2-0, and that's how he qualified for the World Championships. And I don't want to harp on that, but that is one of the objections to round robins, is the top players almost never actually defeat each other in round robins. They just draw each other and beat the players at the bottom. Let's look at Wake on Zay, which just happened last week. It was a tie between Gukesh and Prague. They drew their game against each other. I remember the game. I think a Berlin Rui Lopez type of position. So a little unsatisfying. If one of them had finished half a point above the other for some reason, it would have been by beating some other tail ender or whatever, right? In a knockout format, you really have to triumph over the top other opponent in your top rival or rivals. You have to beat them kind of face to face yourself. So there's a kind of there's just a cool element there of round robins, right? Of course, any format has some degree of luck, and any format also has some degree of you deserved it, right? So, Gukesh definitely deserved the candidates win as well by many other ways of talking about that event, right? Such as the fact that he was never in trouble ever, that he had, that he made more good positions than anybody else, that if anything, he blundered a piece up game against Alireza under time pressure in one round, and honestly he could have finished a point and a half ahead of the entire field, which would be just absolute domination in that kind of an event. Whatever, but there's that idea behind knockouts, and I know there are some players who favor it just because of the lack of collusion alone, right? Just the fact that it's face to face. There's basically no version of cheating in a knockout. But the main problem that I think other people have had with knockouts all along is that after the first round, half of the players have to stop playing chess. And when FIDE runs the World Cup and you bring 100 of the best players in the world across the world to all meet in some little chess town, and they play for 2 days in a tournament that's a 20-day tournament. They play for 2 days, and then half of them are done and they're booking new tickets home. That I don't like, right? So, if I were the player who went to the tournament and I lost the first 2 rounds, I would definitely want to play another match against somebody else who'd lost in the first round. I'd want to play 5 more matches. I would want to play 7 rounds. The knockout, the World Cup knockout is a 7-round affair. I would want to play all 7 rounds and determine, places 1 through 128. Probably somewhere in Siberia, Steki Kun points out, generally, or Kazakhstan, or Kalmykia. So to me, the major problem with knockouts has always been that the players don't play enough, right? They leave the event too soon. Queen e6 played. He's headed towards e5 with the queen. Will you look at that, folks? The queens are coming out. That was the closest thing he had to a symmetrical move. He even leaves the g7 pawn hanging, which is cool. The plan is not to trap white's queen, I don't think, because of queen takes rook. I suspect that's not the plan here. I think the idea would be maybe rook g8. And there's queen h7, though. Bishop g6. Wow. Fascinating. Queen here. And now bishop f5. And it is a pawn sack. Black just gets a really active position. They're holding on to rook g2. Knight g6. 2 pawn sack. Poison pawn variation. Amazing development for black. I wouldn't look too hard at bishop at queen takes g7 as white, but who knows? Fabi may calculate some deep stuff. So to me, b4, b5, you would want to keep playing if you were one of the players. For most players, even if you weren't going to win the whole tournament. And as a fan, you want to see the top players continue, right? For example, let's say you're a big fan of Hikaru Nakamura's, just for argument's sake, right? And then you're watching this tournament here. Imagine if Hikaru were done playing at this point. I know I haven't shown his game yet today, but he is playing. Here, Nodirbek and Firouzja, fans of Nodirbek and Firouzja can keep watching them playing, right? Or fans of Hikaru and Gukesh. These guys both have their fans, obviously, right? The world champion, the champion of streaming. There are going to be people who want to watch their games. They're still here. They're still a resource for the tournament because they're there. And so I think it's better to have them keep playing. As long as there's huge prizes for 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th place, they still have something to play for. And I think as a player, even if you lose the first round, you do have more to gain or to prove by continuing to play the later rounds than by heading home. Yes, you can't win the tournament, but you can aim for 5th place. If you win 2 matches after losing the first match in this event, you can feel great about yourself that you improved your play. Yes, Quantum, thank you. Good request from you. So Magnus plays f6, harmoniously supporting his center and letting the bishop and queen play. Keymer has to play a weird pawn move on the other side of the board to let this bishop out. We don't yet know which way this bishop's going to go. But whichever way it's going to go, it's going to be awkward, right? Like d3 would be awkward for the bishop on b1 unless he first develops it's like e. I could see Vincent playing bishop e4 at some point and then d3, right? And f3 maybe could be played. It leaves his weakness on f4. I think his position is just going to be unharmonious, Vincent's. I mean, not unharmonious. It's going to have positional weaknesses. It's going to have some problems. Okay, Jake points out the final standings also affect the Grand Slam points, right? This is a year-long competition. So if you finish in 5th place here, you're much better positioned for your eventual standing in the whole event and the whole series than if you lose here and finish in like 8th place or 7th place or 6th place. So, and at the same time, every match you win, you're pulling one of your competitors down and putting them further in the basement to keep them from finishing ahead of you in the year-over-year standings. So I think there's still plenty of stuff to play for, in addition to just love of the game, I mean, Aronian and Fedoseev, they were eliminated already in the Rapid, but I'm sure they were glad that they actually got to play some classical Fischer random before being dismissed, just to get to play the games. I'm sure like the main thing they were upset about as they were losing in the Rapid was like, am I not going to get to play? Am I not even going to get to play any... I'm just thinking about a variation, sorry. Am I not even going to get to play any classical chess, That's their favorite format, I think. Both Aronian and Fedoseev is classical Fischer random. So they wanted to get a match. They wanted to get to play. So, my biggest problem with the knockout format b4, b5, and I think every format probably has some minus as well as some plus. So I don't think someone can come up with a format with no minuses, but my biggest concern with the format of a knockout is that you normally have to play speed tie breaks because you can't sit around forever when matches are tied. The possibility of tying a 2-game match is so high that basically you have to include tiebreakers or do something funky, right? Yeah. This tournament doesn't use rest days, by the way. That's pretty rare for top players of this level to have no rest days. If they tie a match, they play their tiebreaker right after the second game. So like yesterday, after Nakamura and Sindarov played a classical game, they then played their tiebreaker. At the World Cup, the schedule would be there'd be a third day for every match. And that third day would be for a tiebreaker or a rest for anybody who doesn't have a tiebreaker. The players are being made to work hard this week. I think, there's probably some room to maybe optimize what tiebreaker you use, but knockout tournaments like this are always going to have tiebreakers at least, which is not ideal, but there it is. It is what it is. I think if you wanted to make the tiebreak better, you might need to take a third day for it and say, some players get a rest day, some players play a tiebreak game. I could imagine maybe like a classical tiebreaker if you played like a classical Armageddon. And I don't think anybody's ever tried classical Armageddon, but imagine something like Fischer random, white gets 2 hours, black gets an hour and a half, and black has draw odds. There's some time disparity, which I think could make it fair between white and black. Again, as Merle says, you could use bidding like they do in most Armageddon games, right? The Blitz games, they say, for example, white gets 5 minutes, you bid how few minutes you're willing to play black with to gain draw odds. And people bid somewhere between 3 minutes and 4.5 minutes. And then they get black and draw odds. So here what you could do is you could say something like white gets 2 hours and black has to bid. And each player bids how much time they're willing to take with black to get draw odds. So someone might bid, 97 minutes and someone else bid 85 minutes. The player with the lower bid with the 85 would then get the black pieces and draw odds with 85 minutes. So Blibup is saying draw odds is too much of an advantage in classical, surely. At this level, it's a huge advantage, right? Because they know how to steer a lot of bad positions towards end games that they can hold. But that just means, Blibup, that they can keep bidding lower and lower for black, right? Like, do you think someone could bid 1 hour and play 1 hour against 2 hours? For draw odds, maybe they could. But you have to acknowledge that having 2 hours of thinking time versus 1 hour of thinking time is also an advantage that these players know how to wield in a classical match, right? It means you're allowed to calculation check multiple times in the game a move your opponent has to go for off of instinct. Something where they have to be like, well, I don't have the time to check this. I sort of believe in it. I'm going to go for it. And the player with 2 hours gets to calculation check them each of those times, potentially, right? So there's some amount of time at which it would be fair, and as they play that kind of format a few times, they would start to get an idea for it, whether it's around an hour and a half, or whether it's around an hour, or whether it's as little as around half an hour versus 2 hours. Something like that would emerge, and it would be kind of a classical game. So, yeah. I mean, they'd be forced to bid. The rule would be you have to bid something, so. Anyway, that's a thought. I think there's room to maybe improve the Armageddon format so it's not as fast. Or if you wanted to do rapid chess, you could, again, use a third full day for it and play like 4 rapid games instead of 2, make it a little bit more reliable or something. I'd rather play one longer game myself. But, they're running a tight ship here. They're on a tight schedule, making the players play every single day without a rest day. I'm okay with that. Chess is supposed to be grueling after all. And let's continue looking at the positions now for a bit. So, last move here we had from Sindarov was Queen e6. Fabi's thinking, yeah, that's one of the benefits of classical. You get to really get into it. If we imagine the idea is to threaten bishop e5, our queen's going to get hit, and this pawn will be hanging. then white needs to sort of prepare themselves for bishop e5. Maybe move the queen out of the way in advance, somewhere like this. Although even here, I was preparing to answer bishop e5 with d4, but like e5 from black, this move is just too weakening, right? Knight e3 check. We're almost smothered mated. We're certainly routed, so there's no way we're playing that as white. So what are we going to do, Fabi, about bishop e5? You know, maybe it isn't good to put our queen in the center of the board, you know? Depends on some details. For sure, muhahas. It's an interesting format, Asher. Asher saying, what about a format where after the 2-game matches, if it's a draw, the players who drew are not eliminated. The players who won those matches go on, and the players who lost the matches are eliminated. Again, I would have the eliminated players continue playing each other in some kind of lower bracket, Asher, right? Like playing for the bottom places. I don't want to kick people out. I like having more games and having the strong players around longer, but I don't think that invalidates your suggestion. But it does have a similar problem as the reason why they have tiebreakers, which is that the players who drew a match and get repaired could draw a match again, and basically could go on and on while the players who won their matches are waiting for the players who drew their matches to eventually have a decision, and they sort of, so to speak, move on to the next round. Right? What is Fabi supposed to do about bishop e5, folks? This b2 square is looking really tender. I mean, you can defend it with your own king, like this. Right? Okay, he's played the other move we were just considering, queen a4, just stepping out of the way. In case of bishop e5, then will he defend the pawn, sack it? I mean, you can't really sack it, can you? Because then, you know, your knight is hanging on a1, your rook's hanging on c1. Yeah, Merles, I think Sindarov showed great skill saving those endgames. I was really impressed. I think maybe the idea is that now you would castle queenside and defend the pawn with your king, and black has just left their pawn undefended, so they now maybe have to respond to what they've done. Though I would say, potentially, Sindarov could play very aggressively here, play bishop g6, and just leave that pawn hanging, and say, you've committed to castling here, I'm now going to castle over to g8, and, you know, play d6 and b6 type moves to leverage open this king. Could be pretty decent position for Sindarov, actually, starting to emerge. I'm starting to see this as kind of nice for Javokir potentially here. Of course, he doesn't have to play bishop e5. This queen a4 move seems to dissuade it by putting her eye on this pawn. But you see my idea here with bishop e5, castles queenside, bishop g6. You can take this pawn if you want, but now I castle to the other side of the board. You see I've got two bishops aimed towards this king's position, and I'm going to break with something like b6 or d6, or I'm going to play rook a8 and trap this queen, and then maybe knight b4 with attacks on a2 or queen c4. Sindarov has played bishop g6 first here. Perfectly reasonable. It's a good square, and you can wait to see what Fabi does about this bishop e5 or even queen e5 kind of threat. And meanwhile, he's preparing to castle this side very quickly here, which now makes sense, you know, with this f-pawn kind of grabbing some space for himself there. We're going to see, you know, maybe him trying to break open the side of the board where white's got the space advantage, Fabi trying to break open the side of the board where Javokir has the space advantage. What a fascinating position already. And these players have spent 35 minutes on their first 7 moves. They're not getting out of the opening very quickly, but they're going to have a very complicated middle game, quite likely, where they'll need some time. And, just a note to the side, this is the kind of position where you could see how maybe you'd rather have an extra 30 to 60 minutes on the clock in exchange for draw odds. Yeah. Yeah, and Quantum Photon is correct that for now, given that these events are Fischer random, the draw percentage is so low that having matches finish 1-1 again and again is much less of a likelihood. So we're not facing millions of tiebreakers. Maybe we don't need to trouble our heads about the tiebreaker format too much just yet. But, chess players seem to like to do that, right? To argue strenuously about what makes the best, fairest competition. I'm part of that myself, for sure. Okay, any new moves from Magnus? D4 from Vincent. All right, at least he's fighting. I'd had the idea, by the way, here that potentially when Magnus castled, knight b6 was also a pretty interesting candidate move, like in the Sindarov game, right? Idea being if you play c5, there's knight c4 now without this queen d4 move. Perfectly plausible move. And there's also the move knight d5. And because white's played g4, you can't start kicking this knight out of the center with e4. You're simply putting it on an outpost and riddling white's position with weaknesses, right? So I think knight b6 was a very possible move for Magnus here, where he chose queenside castling first. Now d4 from Vincent, it's definitely a bold move, right? He's trying to make space for his bishops, trying to avoid any problem where the pawns block his pieces in. But it also, yeah, he slightly risks having some development issues because he's played g4. I guess he's okay. Black's also spent 2 pawn moves without getting the bishops out yet. Now Magnus plays this knight b6 move. And tactic alert, folks. Tactic alert. Black's threatening the c-pawn, right? White could seemingly block the queen off with d5, gaining space. And this could be very, very favorable for white, right? Oh, I don't know anything about that, Muhahas. Even Merles is suggesting, d5 grabbing space. It makes sense, right? It makes sense for white. d5 grabbing space, locking the black pieces away is easy to get really awkward in your position when you lack space early in Fischer random. But here, I think black has a solution to d5. A very, very clear solution. Once y'all see it, you will discard d5 as an option for white. Okay, Blibup's wondering, is it knight d5, right, with an attack here? But black doesn't have a lot of pieces to join that attack, do they? Yeah, the idea is this. You just take apart the structure from the bottom of it. Blibup, like striking at the bottom. We get your same queen d5 idea, but we expose this rook. And queen d5 check. Oh, I hadn't analyzed it very far, had I? There is knight d2. Uh-oh. Now I don't even believe this myself, now that I see knight d2. Is there any chance Magnus missed that? d5 looks very desirable for white, barring a refutation. Barring a straight-up refutation. Man, look at the tactics that you get to calculate. Oh, Keymer's already moved. He's played d5! Uh-oh, Maggie. All right. I mean, we don't have to, give up on Maggie's position immediately. There is still, c6 and trying to fight. But, you know, in theory, white might have e4, and you might be locked in here. You might be locked in. Oh, my word. Could he have counted on knight c4 and not done a thorough calculation? I mean, it's only 2 moves deep, and we're talking one of the greatest players that chess has ever seen. But everybody makes little, you know, discards a line too early now and then. What does he have in mind? Magnus has already spent a tempo castling. So his king's already committed to this area. Not only would he be under a space disadvantage, but a move like c6, it's trash. The rook's opposite his king. You're never threatening c takes d here. I can play bishop d2, and you're not going to do this to yourself, are you? That's basically like a helpmate. Technically, you've got bishop c7, d6. Magnus is chill, says Merles. He's made a move already in response to d5. Simply d6. So he accepts a space disadvantage. If his king could still castle this way, I would honestly be less worked up about it, because you could play like a6, bishop a7, play a king's Indian with your king over here. And it could be playable. But now your king is right in the part of the board where white's going to play this classic c5 break at some point. Oh, Maggie. Oh, Maggie, I'm going to downgrade your position. I'm going to downgrade your position. I like white. I'm going to upgrade Sindarov as well while we're over here. I like what Sindarov got actually already in 7 moves here. Bishop f2, he castles to this side. I approve. I think Fabi might also castle to that side. But I love what Sindarov did in this opening. He actually managed to work it out. And I don't like what Magnus did. I think there was like a clear mistake here. I think he should not have castled queenside. That was a lazy move. Just thinking it's flexible and waiting to see what white does, but you haven't yet figured out which direction your bishops are coming out. You should have kept playing like meaty moves, you know, like knight b6 attacking this pawn maybe, or c6 to develop this bishop and threaten d5 and, you know, maybe d6 depending on how white defends it, but just getting this central structure set up. Or maybe even bishop f7 could have been a move. Hitting this pawn. You know, and then if white plays d3, then you come here, hitting this pawn. Right? And this moves you towards possibly castling this side if you want to. No, he needed to do something more incisive than this castles move. And after that soft move, he doesn't have the power for knight b6 anymore. He gets locked in by this space advantage for white. And RKJ, Blibup is saying c5, let's go. I mean, not quite yet, right? Not quite yet. Vincent needs to develop some pieces and secure his king first, but c5 at some point. And RKJ is saying it's always bad to castle super early in freestyle because it commits your king, it removes your flexibility for evacuating your king for an area, and you don't know which area of the board is going to get opened up. I think that must be like a slight overstatement, but it's funny that in normal chess, you've got that incorrect principle they tell beginners to like castle as early as you can. Sometimes they say that's the entire goal of the opening even, not just a principle, but they'll be like, the goal of the opening is to get your king castled as soon as possible, which is not quite true. But to have the opposite thing here, where we're saying don't castle is quite funny. All right, Tweedledee, we've got a Vincent fan here. This is definitely a big opportunity for Vincent here after cleanly winning his first quarterfinal match against Alireza to get this huge advantage suddenly against Magnus. Someone in chat said play f3 here. Oh, Vincent plays a glorious move, bishop f5, right? Because what does he want to do? He wants to lock in the space advantage with e4. Why? You have to defend the d-pawn properly before you play c5, right, folks? But before he plays e4, he goes bishop f5, check. If knight d7, then this bishop's hard to challenge, right? And eventually he'll go to e6. You'll still have to play bishop f7 and trade your good bishop for white's bad bishop. So Magnus bites the bullet immediately, offering the trade of his good bishop for Vincent's bad bishop. And then Vincent plays the f3 move from Merle's, activating the queen for the attack over here. Honestly, this may be too much, folks, but I'm upgrading the sensei evaluation even further. White has the huge space advantage. Black's got the weak light squares. And the king in the eye of the storm, so to speak. This is going to be a pawn storm, right, with c5. It's the positional plan. It's the checkmating plan. The light squares are terrible. Imagine a normal King's Indian if they took the light square bishops off the board. Right? Imagine the normal King's Indian without light square bishops. With the king castled on the king's side and a bishop on g7. How do you think people would evaluate those positions? How would you evaluate just a normal any normal King's Indian position, right? From the classical, around move 8 or 9, nothing committed yet. And then you take the light squared bishops off the board. What would be the evaluation? I think the computers would say it's like +2 for white. They would say it's basically winning. Now imagine if the black king walked all the way to the queen side in a classical King's Indian after the light squared bishops were traded. That's my justification for saying that here, Vincent is already in a winning position. Okay, Guten Tag, Tweedledee. Nice to see that Germany is represented here in our chat. And nice to see that we've got fans of different players here, right? Sometimes you've got one or two players who seem to have all the fans. For about 10 years, it was Magnus Carlsen. Then streaming came about, and it seemed like, okay, Hikaru's got some fans too. Then you'd have some Americans who were fans of Fabi just because he was from the US. You'd have some Indians who were fans of Anand just because he was from India. Just kidding, Indians. I know he was world champion. That's a normal reason to be a fan of somebody. You just take it you just always take it to that extreme, you know? And I think most Indians out there will know what I mean about the Indian fans where it's just like, wow, you like that person so much just because they're from India. That's really a lot. That's a lot. But it's great to see that we've got fans from all kinds of countries for all kinds of players, you know? And, we've got some incredible players in this tournament, and hopefully all of them have got their fans. Hopefully, even the less well-known Javokir Sindarov has earned himself at least one fan here this week. So this is a huge opportunity for Vincent to get off to a 1-0 lead against Magnus. I think this advantage is well within his wheelhouse. I think it's an obvious advantage. And I think it's a winning size advantage. I've made my case for it, at least, and my case makes sense to me. Magnus is, maybe the greatest defensive player out there. And so Vincent will want to beat him in the middle game, not like go into some endgame up one pawn. You need to really kill Magnus if you want to beat Magnus. You need to really kill him. Absolutely, Tweedledee. You could come up with reasons to be a fan of Anand. I was just playing. Some of those Indian fans are so intense. I like to laugh about it a little bit. Wind them up every now and then. Even though I'm a fan of all the Indian players, actually, because all the top Indian players, as far as I know, are super like good personalities, right? Like sometimes there are chess players, who have more of like a gruff, competitive, Korchnoi kind of personality. As far as I know, there's like no top Indian players who have been anything less than like, really pleasant, good sportsmanship and all that. So I'm actually a fan of every single one of them myself, but the fans sometimes make me laugh a little bit. Wow, Quantum, you think people could get up to 7 to 10 moves of prep? By bucketing the positions into about 50 sets of 20 positions. Even if you could bucket them into 50 sets of 20 positions, isn't 50 positions times 7 to 10 move variations too far out? For reference, Quantum Photon, 7 to 10 moves is about the depth of my own theoretical knowledge in chess, which I've played semi-professionally and professionally for 20 years. Admittedly, I wasn't a theory monkey and I didn't spend a lot of effort on memorizing openings, but that seems like a lot to me. I agree with you, RKJ. It would be great to have even more qualification going on. Their current plan is basically 2 qualifications. But the thing is, with 10 players, like each of the people they're inviting is bringing a lot of fans, which means they're bringing a lot of people who have a stake in the event, right? Like by bringing Magnus, by bringing Naka, they're bringing tons and tons of eyes and fans and excitement to the game by bringing such top players, I do love qualifiers. And my solution, RKJ, is ultimately to make qualifiers into a big deal. In other words, you might not get all your favorite players in the Grand Slam, but you get more of your favorite players to play in the qualifier, and that's kind of what makes up for it a little bit. You know what I mean? So if you make the qualifier a bigger deal, then you get something out of the star power of like Nepomniachtchi and Wesley So were playing in the qualifier, even if you don't get them in the actual event. So that's how I would sort of strategize that. Yeah, Jacob, I think freestyle is just a marketing term, just their idea of what to call it. Based on whether they think Chess 960 or Fischer Random would be a popular phrase or not. My favorite one is Fischer Random, because I think we can give respect to his chess legacy, despite the fact that he went sort of crazy / had horrible opinions later on in life about some political things. But I know there are some people for whom once you say something like too awful politically or etc., then the name is tainted and they don't want to use it and don't want to deal with it. But there's no rule difference. Freestyle chess is Fischer Random chess so far. But I think they have in mind some of their when they're saying freestyle, they might also be thinking of some of their innovations around the format, right? Like having the players like pick who their opponent is, or having, I don't know. I think there's some innovations around the format with the knockouts and the rapid and stuff that they might think sort of fits in with like the theme or the feel or the vibe of the word freestyle. You know what I mean? For now, the qualifiers were rapid Merles, and I think the qualifiers should be classical. If the qualifiers were played as classical chess, I would have played in the qualifiers. A6 with the idea of bishop a7 blib up. Absolutely, it's where the bishop had to go. It's the only way to play this for black. You will then have to also perhaps play king b8 to defend the bishop, right? Against this diagonal. And notice that white is going to build up on this diagonal with bishop f2 at some point as well, potentially. So I don't think it's going to pose a huge problem for Magnus. This bishop, for Vincent, this bishop a7 stuff. I mean, it's the only way for Magnus to defend, but it shouldn't be a problem for white. Oh, is that true, Jacob? Did they reduce the 960 to 950 or something? I don't know. That I don't know about. I'm sorry not to have all the official knowledge. I do think they removed the starting position because technically the normal chess starting position is one of the 960 positions. I did hear that that was removed. All right, let's check on Fabi and Javokir. Fabi, as predicted, castles to the same side over there, and Sindarov lashes out for queenside space. I don't think Fabi would want to trade here. And he's got to keep his space from the c-pawn and concede this space for black. Do you want to use your queen to blockade the a-pawn? No. We're going to re-centralize her to d1, I suspect. And I get that one wrong. Fabi takes. He's got to have an idea in mind. Otherwise, he's just traded a near center pawn for that weak a-pawn. And it'll just be a positional advantage for Sindarov here with a flexible formation. Lots of center pawns to come. Planned setup. Interesting swap for Prez. There is that fun format where you start with the back rank clear, and then you place your own 8 pieces one at a time. You know what I mean? Like your first 8 moves and your opponent's first 8 moves are just placing pieces on the first rank. That would definitely feel like a very freestyle format, right? That would make a lot of sense with the word freestyle. I mean, I don't know what the name of that variant is, which is another reason it would be open to being renamed. That would definitely feel like freestyle, the one where you place your own pieces on the first rank to start. For some people, would have the advantage that the games would, in general, look more harmonious. For some people, would have the disadvantage that you wouldn't get these weird, awkward games. All right, Fabi has played his next move. It's got to be a good move, or I'm going to downgrade this position to a black advantage. It's simply repositioning the queen without developing the knight on a1. Uh-oh, Fabi. Oh my goodness. Today could be the day, folks. It's only maybe a small edge for now, but I prefer Sindarov's position. And, Fabi and Magnus, they won the first matches, the quarterfinals 2-0. But today could be the day for upsets. The teenagers, I guess Keymer's 20 now, but, the youngsters definitely have their chances right now. And Vincent, let me tell you this, buddy. Don't play too slowly. Don't blow this by flagging. It doesn't take 9 minutes to play e4. You choose between e3 and e4 in 1 minute and you play that move. This is the best position you might ever have in your entire life against Magnus. In any blitz game, rapid game, slow game, Fischer random, anything. This may be the best position you ever get against Magnus. Do you understand the weight of that? You have got to make the most of it. You have got to beat him today. That's it. If you can't win this game against Magnus, you may never beat him. You may never believe that you can beat him. It's got to be now. So do not flag. This kind of move e4, it's got to be obvious. Save your 30 minutes for a calculation later when you're looking for a forced win. You're not going to be able to calculate a complicated forced win in 30 seconds against Magnus. Don't waste your time, my boy. Do not waste your time. Blibub says that Vincent's beaten Magnus before. I guess whatever position he had where Magnus resigned was the best position he's ever had against Magnus then. So my whole rampage was wrong, but I didn't know about it. Is that tiger parenting, Jacob? Yikes. I didn't know I had it in me. I thought that was only medium parenting. Not even parenting, coaching. I didn't think that was too intense. I thought that was, supportive but real talk. All right, let's see what's going on here between Naka and Gukesh. All right, let's see their first moves. Gukesh hasn't learned about bringing out the rook. Rook f5, blundering a tempo to knight to g3. Retreating the rook. Oh, Naka takes the tempo with the bishop, sure. f5 is a dumb move, luckily for Gukesh. g6. Why play g6 if you're not taking on f5? There we go. Takes on f5. Takes. All right. So, Naka gave up most of his advantage with f5, right? He could have played instead of that something like, I don't know, e4, c6, bishop g3, knight g6. And only once black really, really goes after your pawn, then you say, okay, tempo. Only when they give you f5 for free. Time is important. Now you kick them, and now it's like crushing, right? The knight goes back to h8, basically. I guess it could head to c4. Like this. Castle. This is the kind of position that Naka could have had, folks. That's how bad f5 from Gukesh was. But humorously enough, the blunder from move 2 by Gukesh, Naka returns the favor with the exact same blunder on move 5, which is losing time with a pawn on f5. And Gukesh kind of is crawling back into the game here. He still seems to be worse, right? Yeah, he's still worse. Still down 2 tempi of development. Oof. Yeah, it's not bueno here. He can't play d6, he can't play e6. They all hang, rooks or kings. There is some pressure. Naka did a good job posting the bishops here. So he still has an edge. He has an edge, but it's not completely won, so you could imagine potentially it's still possible to get kind of a comeback from Gukesh, or the game can still be saved with his skills in the other phases of the game. Vincent beat Magnus in the first game in the 2023 World Cup, and then Magnus came back in that match. Thank you, Blibup. That's great information. That's very important context for that matchup between those two players. To know that Vincent has beaten Magnus before definitely changes the coloring of it. Let's check the position between Nodirbek and Firouzja. And I think what we see here is that White has a decent advantage because the plan of pushing pawns on the king side is quite simple, quite clear that it's going to put a little bit of pressure on black. So there's some edge for White in that game. And let me just put their names in the correct order, I guess, for this matchup. There we go. Yeah, wow, Magnus in semis. Magnus won the GOAT Challenge last year, which was essentially the precursor to this Grand Slam that we're watching now, and he did it in dominating fashion. And he should lose today against Keymer, but I think he'll come back and win tomorrow and eventually win this tournament. That's my prediction. Somebody asked me at the beginning of today my prediction. I didn't get around to it yet because there's tons of action here. But I think Magnus will win this tournament. I don't think the Fabi versus Sindarov matchup is as clear. I think there's a chance. I think there's definitely chances for Sindarov to take the match. On the other hand, Sindarov, for all his skills, we saw him get into trouble eventually against Naka in both of the classical games. He made mistakes and got outplayed at various phases in all of them. So I would guess that Fabi's the better player still, but the gap is maybe not as big. Maybe Fabi's not as big a favorite as Magnus is. I say as Magnus completely tanks this game and gets beaten brutally today, but I think it'll be a one-off for him most likely. I came into this tournament saying, look, last year Fabi was the clear number 2, and Magnus clearly beat him in 2 separate matches, 1.5 to 1/2. One in the GOAT Challenge finals, and one as a sort of opening act for the World Championships in Singapore last November. So to me, the pecking order between Magnus, Fabi, and the rest of the people at the GOAT Challenge last year was clear. Magnus number 1, Fabi number 2, and everyone else below. So coming into this tournament, which is part of an entire season, right? Coming into this season of the Freestyle Grand Slam, the big question, the very first question to me is there going to be anybody here who's going to be able to challenge Magnus for that top spot? I said there's no reason to think that Fabi could surpass Magnus given the gap and the fact that, they are who they are, right? Their play is what it is. They've been playing for a while. They're kind of where they are. So the question is, was there anybody else who could come in and be an even closer number 2 to Magnus, or maybe beat him or push him compared to last year? And I thought, well, Naka wasn't in the event last year. He's somebody, 2,800. He's in the top 2 or 3 in the world in classical chess, seemingly. Maybe in Fischer Random, he might somehow be above Fabi and closer to Carlsen. Possibly. Okay? The other 2 names I had in mind were Nodirbek and Gukesh. Why? Because they're young. They could have improved a lot since last year, and they have been consistently at the top of the classical events played over the board with normal chess in this past year, right? And you saw that just a week ago in Wake on Zay, or 2 weeks ago maybe now, with Gukesh in shared first place and Nodirbek half a point behind Gukesh and Prague. These guys have been at the top of every event, and they're improving, and they're young, so it could have been them. But Nodirbek got beat 2-0 by Magnus last round. Gukesh got beat 2-0 by Fabi, and it turns out at the moment a complete disaster at Fischer Random. And he should be relegated to the qualifiers, unfortunately, till he learns and gets his Fischer Random level up. And Naka was also knocked out in the first round by Sindarov. So none of those names are going to be there to challenge Magnus. And I think it's clear that he is going to be the top dog this season. I think that big question is already more or less answered. Bishop e5 from Sindarov. Interesting. I felt like the bishop was already placed on b8, and that he would either be improving this knight or looking to advance these pawns somehow. I thought there was also some chance of b5 being played, because that pawn's a little bit under fire and you could grab some more space, or even c5. But bishop e5, I don't know what it's about. We'll find out. We'll find out. Apparently this position is very, very complex, because Fabi and Sindarov are playing it kind of slowly at the moment. It's not a pawn structure they've ever had before. Compared to that, Nodirbek and Firouzja, they've transposed to a structure they understand. Like, looking at this position, they know the plans. You know what I mean? Like, Nodirbek knows the plan is like a kingside pawn storm. Firouzja knows it's a queenside pawn storm. They know what squares the pieces are on, what the different endgames look like, whether, to what extent they're going to fight for the e-file. There's this knight d6 move that's keeping black from challenging the e-file at the moment, so black has to consider, is there a way to trade rooks on the e-file to reduce the pressure from the coming attack. Has Nodirbek really not moved this entire time? That's weird. Kind of goes against what I said about them knowing what the plans are. I think h4 is just sort of like the clear move here. But I guess it's a superficial move, and Nodirbek's going deeper. I hear you, RKJ. But the last time Naka played, the last times he's played, his rating has gone up despite the rating deflation. Right? When he sort of made his comeback 2 candidate cycles ago, he had to play a qualifier to get into the candidates, right? His rating was probably around 27, 70, 75, something like that. He's gained 25, 30 points in a relatively small number of games. So I personally think that Hikaru's probably about worth his rating. I know there's been rating deflation, but his rating has gone up in the small amount he's played since the rating deflation. He has consistently performed his rating, I think. Yeah. I understand that Hikaru and Magnus's ratings, you can't be sure how accurate they are because they play so little. But we don't have enough data to say for sure, but the data we have does say that Naka is that good. So the data could be wrong, but the data does point in that direction to me. All right. I need my Lebkuchen here. Not doing much in the way of breakfast with these 4 a.m. broadcasts. Swap for Prez, I think he played Norway chess as well. Probably. But he may have only played like 2 events last year in classical chess. I don't know. Hang on, I had this thing. I found it again, this link. Somebody on Reddit had posted like the top performance ratings. So in 2024, the top performance ratings, okay? Magnus performed 28-31, exactly his current rating, in 18 games with a 12 out of 18 score. Okay, 18 games, that's only 2 events. It's not a lot of games, but I mean, it is dead on to his rating, so there's no reason to think that he should be deflated by 30 or 40 points. Naka played 27 games, so he played 3 events. 16.5 out of 27, performance rating 28-27, number 2 in the world. Behind Magnus. And 2 points ahead of Erigaisi, who performed 28-25 in 113, 5 times as many games, or 4.5 times as many games. And then number 4, Gukesh, 28-02 over 88 games. Number 5, Fabiano Caruana, 2800 over 85 games. So Fabi played a real year like the young kids did, and he kept up a 2800 performance. But that data does not suggest that Magnus or Hikaru are overrated at all. It's not easy. Naka's rating has been going up. He crossed 2800. He's going up while you say there's deflation that he's missing. But why is the deflation missing him? Knight c2, knight f7. Yeah, these moves had to be played. The knights have to come out. And, then I think knight d4 looks pretty decent for Fabi. Where's this queen going? Isn't she trapped? What's up, Javokir? What's up? What are you doing about knight d4? Nodirbek is not playing? Let's refresh his board. Seems inconceivable. He is not playing. What's wrong, Nodirbek? Well, I don't know what Nodirbek's issue is, but we're going to go check on Vincent. He plays e4. Magnus has got one square for one piece on the entire board. Bishop f7, rook f7. The ELO system obviously has some problems, and I'm not an expert on it. But I do think I understand math well enough to say that there's no evidence that Hikaru is overrated. All right, knight d4, bishop d4, bishop d4. I think Sindarov blew it. I don't know why he let that knight just come into the middle of the board and take his bishop from him. I don't know if I should say equal or white's better. I mean, I really like the bishop pair. I'm going to call it equal for now. I'm going to be conservative here and say black's got a lot of squares in the middle of the board for their pieces, including the knights. So maybe this isn't tragic yet, but he seems confused. He seems confused. Like, he plays bishop e5 and then just gives that bishop. I don't get it. But, I mean, this structure is unusual. You know, it reduces the strength of the players and the commentators to have such a weird structure, right? Like, it makes us all worse to be so unfamiliar. We don't know even, like, we could spend our time making our position worse because we've got the wrong positional goals, right? Like, I could come up with a plan where black tries to play d5 and e5, and it might be that makes the c file weak and it's a bad plan, right? So it's really, it's really like hard. And Vincent is bleeding time on just random developing moves. Come on, Vincent. Give it to him. Maybe knight a5 and b4 to play c5 with the pawn rolling and go all the way to c6 and break the light squares, b7 and c6. We haven't had a recent podcast where we talked about like the FIDE ratings in too much detail. They come up now and then, you know. I guess there's also, I mean, we should also just ask the question, what if, you know, you just play c5 immediately? How good or bad is that, right? Let's say black takes, you put the knight here. Can black sack on d5? Probably not, because you take the rook before you take the knight, right? So black has to do something like this. Wait, and then white could go, I mean, here, if they want to really, like, go on a rampage, right? Vinny could already do something like this if he wanted to. If I have to put the rook on d6 instead of d8, then I'm a little bit worried about this move. But maybe there's like knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes, threatening this piece as well as, you know, some knight checks. This could get intense, though, right? Because I have the idea of taking the rook with counter check, and the pawn can't recapture. So there's like knight c3 and knight e3 to calculate, but I feel like actually it's going to work out for white probably. Weirdly. So you could potentially just play c5 right here. That would partly explain why he took on f7 instead of just leaving the bishops facing each other, right? The bishops were sort of facing off like that. He chose to take. And I thought Magnus would take back with the knight. He took with the rook. So c5 does come in as a possible move already. I'm going to check if my kid needs something. 1 second, folks. Merci de m'avoir cherché. Sorry, folks. That's the difference between an at-home show and a professional broadcast, where the broadcaster has no other duties. Perhaps even folks to back them up. King C2 played. Great. He wants to go here. I wondered whether or not he could do this because of knight C4. But I guess it is rather simple. The knight just gets stuck there. And there's B5. What's the point? Oh, that's nice to hear, Cross. I mean, we already see that Magnus didn't take this pawn. But Magnus played bishop a7. And Vincent didn't play king b1? You're just going to hang out with your king there? Is he worried about knight d3? He doesn't want to let that knight in? That's black's one good piece. I suppose you have to allow it, no? I'm not even like, why can't I understand his idea after knight takes c4? What is he planning there? Sindarov has countered the dark squares here with c5. Forced that bishop back into its hole. Developed his knight further into the middle of the board. Yeah, he's probably still fine. I don't really see anything other than like king b1 is the next move, right? Then b5. Maybe a4 instead of knight a5. Maybe knight d2. Well, knight d2 and knight a5 is more or less the same thing. I mean, at some point you might have to deal with knight d3 though, right? So like a4 doesn't really threaten anything. The pawn's defended. Black plays knight d3. It's true you have quite a bit of time as white. You know, these pieces are not getting over there for a while. Okay, I guess I'm going to guess that the idea would simply have been knight a5 here. Knight takes, bishop takes, just like this. And now white's got the c6 square for the rook. Okay, now I can finally see it. I get it. So like the king comes here. And okay, we do have to avoid our queen being trapped. Here's a funky variation. Here, rook takes, knight takes. Do you see what's going on with this variation here? This breakthrough. It's a funny thing, because normally you try and keep your pieces protected. So you'd play king b8, but that move basically loses to this, right? That's kind of like what white's banking on. But if black goes king a8, leaving the rook hanging, then this sacrifice doesn't work for white, and white's down a rook. So basically this knight f5 move doesn't work, but that's its intention, is to deal with bishop a7 with rook c7. Okay, so white has to play something they don't exactly want to play, like queen here, and transfer the queen. I'm going to assume that knight e2, we've got it covered. Queen c6 is the big threat. If we tried this for black, then after check, the king has to go defend the rook, and then this is hanging. So here there's basically no defense for black against queen c6, queen a6, and mopping up, and white's winning. Okay. Bravo, Vinny. That, I agree with you. I'm convinced. It all makes sense. It all makes sense. Okay, so black can't take the pawn. Vinny plays bishop d2, king b8, bishop e3, preventing... Because by now, you know, if he goes here, black has knight takes c4 and the bishop attacks the queen, right? So now he goes bishop e3. Against knight c4, he can take the bishop on a7 with check. So it's going to be like knight c8 at some point. But Magnus hits him with a little tactical detail. Knight h3. The queen's going to have to go to g2. And then is he going to try something like knight c4 there? No, it doesn't work. Does it? What's Magnus up to? Vincent, you can't burn all this time, man. Your queen is trapped. You have to go to g2. So just do it. Nike yourself, my boy. Tweedledee, you think he's going for a draw with knight f4, knight h3, back and forth? Knight f4 has just been played. I think Magnus can go here. I mean, I think Vincent can go here. Because against knight c4, you just take with check, right? And then just keep playing. Truth is, he doesn't have to play b5, though. Yeah. Not so obvious. Not so obvious. I'm being a little cavalier with his pawn. He's played queen f2, Vincent. Yeah, nice move, Vincent. Now against knight h3, I'll maybe go queen e1 or queen e2. Yeah, honestly, I mean, at some point, Vincent should be able to just take this thing if it keeps bothering him, right? He should be able to keep playing. I don't think there's a forced draw with these knight moves. The Dojo eval right now, I think white should still be winning, basically, eventually. Yeah, knight d3 after queen c4. Okay, so I just gave a variation with... I haven't played queen c4 in any of these variations. Here? Knight d3? No. Knight e3? Oh, like this, like this. Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting. Knight a5, rook b8. Yeah. And then after knight here, does black even have knight d3, taking the other rook? Yeah. Yeah, so this whole queen d2 line, I think, didn't work. Vincent was right to go to f2 first. Magnus plays h5. Looking for some counterplay. Man, Vincent, if you were ever going to get a chance to play c5. But maybe c5, knight c4. Jeez, it's hard to play with Magnus. It's like he's trying to checkmate Stockfish or something, you know? Aye, aye, aye. Okay, let me update the other board. Oh no, Fabi's deep in thought. Okay. Whew. If he takes on f4 here, then black could like take out his center pawn using this tactic, then lodge the knight on e3. Looks very good for black. So I don't think Vincent wants to grab the pawn that way. I don't think he wants to take on h5 either. He just wants to allow hg, fg at some point. But he can't have his king defending the d3 square all game. It's got to get out of the way at some point, and he's got to break with c5. Otherwise, what's he doing? Hoi, yo, 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 yo. This king c2 has been a little bit awkward. Very hard to play from White's perspective. For all that the position looks great, nice move from Magnus too. Basically, he doesn't want to give Vincent infinite time, right? So let's say we have to cover d3 to stop knight d3. Black will trade and start putting the, these two trap pieces that we're doing nothing. Can try and get into the game like this on this file. Maybe you defend up to a point, but they start to find things to attack, right? They're in the game now. Actually, maybe like this. So that if White defends it, we can attack it a second time. And that g-pawn already looks basically dead. So Black's making progress. It means White doesn't have infinite time to do their deed over here. Although, this sort of stuff should still be... There should still be some way that this stuff is good here for White. But at least, yeah, with h5, Magnus has a plan to get these pieces over here involved in the game. Let me just explain briefly what Sindarov's doing with like c5 and then knight d6. He's looking to maybe trade the knight and bishop for the knight and bishop, leave Fabi with this bishop, and try and present a strong enough wall to keep that bishop from being very effective. So what Fabi might want to do is play d4 to open up the bishop and the rook by trading off the strong pawn on c5 that's blocking them at the moment. But he has to be a little bit careful about when he does it. In the past, knight e3 would have been really good for black, but now it's not that good because black doesn't have a dark squared bishop to take advantage of it later. So d4 definitely seems playable now. And how would that move play out? Black might try and take this pawn, right? Takes, takes, takes. All right, so basically what we're going to get now, if we go for something like this from Fabi's perspective, he breaks open the bishop, but black remains very strong in the center, right? The knight is always going to be very solidly defended here, and black's going to look for threats on these squares. In fact, maybe black would even do something like this. Rook takes, bishop takes, rook f5. You know, something really punchy. If I get checked, I'm just bringing my king up to f7, and I don't even care if it has to go out to g6 and stuff. And I can always support the knight if it gets attacked. I want to play, you know, rook g5, queen e2, and just attack the white king. White's got two connected passers over here that black can't really oppose, but it's going to take them a while to get going. And that's two extra pawns of strength in the other part of the board. That makes it hard for white to fight against black here. But, you know, maybe move like queen f3, just knowing that the endgames are good, would deal with things in this particular move order. I guess black would have to go like queen c4. Pop this bishop. Still looking for a home. Maybe steal a pawn. And then, you know, black's kind of more in control because the single pawn with the black pieces well centralized is not a huge threat. You know, that b pawn is not outside of the realm of this knight. So that would be interesting d4 option for Fabi. His other option is to just initiate trades first. Like this, this. I guess take. Might as well give black that double pawn and not have your rook leave the file. And then play d4. Fabi's traded on d6. He's heading this way. I was just starting to think this looks better than the other one just now. For one thing, we're leaving black with this b6 pawn as a potential weak pawn, and we still have this f pawn instead of that. That was a bad pawn trade when I took on c5 for white and let black win the pawn on e4. Oh, but I didn't even guess correctly how Sindarov was recapturing. He took back with the e pawn so that against d4, he'll just be able to leave the pawn on c5 blocking that bishop. And then with bishop g6, he takes back with the h pawn. So he's going to defend this knight via rook f5. He's going to hold white's bishop at bay with the c5 pawn. The knight's going to anchor b6. And he's going to transfer his rooks to f5, maybe e5, g5. Right? This rook's going to come through like that. Oh my goodness. What an interesting setup from Javok here. Did anybody see that coming? This ed6 to hold the dark squares against white's remaining bishop. Funky strategic play. And it makes sense. Fabi's very good at this kind of stuff too, though. So he'll find some assets for white in this mixed up position. He'll come up with some ideas. What white would love would really be to open the D file here maybe. While there's these two pawns back here. Like if white could play, e4, pawn takes, that looks pretty good for white. So e4, would he just play knight b4 in response? I feel like that is what Javokir would have in mind against e4 here. He's not going to want to trade this d pawn and expose just how weak his d file is. Do you see how quickly, like, one little difference can change who's better? One little pawn structure change, and it's like, oh, now white's good. Oh, now black's good, right? If I took like this, do you see how suddenly white's good? They just put rooks on the d file, right? Play e4. Suddenly it looks beautiful, right? Then as black, I just leave that pawn on d2. I play knight b4. And suddenly my position as black makes sense, right? Suddenly you're like, oh, I see what black is doing. Right? Rook here, maybe even sack the b6 pawn. If we want domination, maybe grab this pawn for free. Maybe white has to play rook c2 to not sack a pawn. But we can see this bishop is being controlled and the knight is great. And right here, I'd been getting a good position for white when I didn't play ed6. When I played queen d6, it was trades, d4. And suddenly white's position looked pretty decent here. Right? To anchor the knight, it's almost looking like I need to play e6, and this bishop's starting to emerge as a good piece. Also, let us say, with the queen on d6 instead of e6, white could play e4, potentially, and it would win the knight unless I en passant, pretty much. I mean, there is c4, rook c4, but let's just assume that doesn't work. So white can force that trade of the d pawn for the f pawn. There goes black's space on the king side. These become isolated pawns. e4's coming. And again, it's starting to look kind of nice for white. If we try and get off this diagonal because of e4, we might not even have a good answer to rook c4. Like, our king position's weird. I guess we have to maybe play g5 or something. So there's certain positions where these little strategic details have a huge impact on the evaluation. And here you see Fabi playing a3 to prevent this knight from hitting this root. So now he's threatening big time this e4 move. And Sindarov has to do something to prepare for it and make sure he's not going to have to trade his f pawn. The move I wanted to play was rook f5, but that does seem to walk into e4, huh? If this knight gets kicked back here by e4, then how do we hold b6? And then white will be able to play d4 next once the knight's already been kicked back, huh? All right, so the knight says, yep, I got to head back. So he offers the queen trade, which is probably okay for black. He also threatens the e2 pawn and the queen. And if white plays queen b6, then perhaps instead of queen e2, which would be very messy since white's queen gets into the middle of the board too, probably he throws in rook b8 first, sends the queen over there, and maybe even grabs this pawn and says, like, he's got some threats against those pawns. Actually, e-pawn's so important. Maybe once the white queen is out of the middle, you would take here. So maybe I should go queen a6 for white to hold that pawn and keep an eye on this one. But yeah, the feeling is still after rook b2 that black's doing okay-ish. Now let's have a quick evaluation of the endgame. Let's just see. It's another pawn structure change. And there's this intense strategic battle between the bishop and knight. So if white traded on e6, what would be the next move there? e4 or d4 or something? So now d4 doesn't look very good to me. Black can either hold this point or even advance at some point with c4, right? Yeah, maybe just advance immediately. And then put the knight on d5, and that looks like a nice position for the knight. So maybe e4 would be more to the point. And then one option we can't overlook for black would be maybe e5, clamping on this move now. And setting up just solid pawns all on dark squares to hold this piece back. And the only lever white really has now is b4, but this is so solid that black can basically even ignore it and just go to the a file. Right? Rook c3, rook a4. Takes. Black looks very strong here to me. But you have to see everything. I mean, like White's got ideas too here, right? Where we go after the base. Knight c8. Rook d3. Knight c8. Rook here. Little tactico. But black's got one as well. And black's up a pawn in the rook ending. Jeez. Yeah, there's a lot of little tactical details as well. They're fighting for these strategic pluses and minuses, but there's a lot of little tactics that affect what they can or can't achieve. I'm going to leave it on equal for the moment. But I could very well be wrong because there's so much possibility here and the position is so strategically unusual. White could trade queens. White could play queen d3. Queen d3 maybe gets in the way of your pawns in the center a little bit. I don't know what's going on. Let's turn to the other game where I also don't know what's going on. After h5 from Magnus, Vincent played rook fd1 like in our analysis line. hg, fg, knight c8 from Magnus. Honestly, that's a relief from Vincent to have some of that tension traded off. I, in my variation, had pursued the move queen h7 here when we'd been analyzing earlier. But okay, Magnus plays knight c8, and that's the live position Vincent's thinking. Any problem with c5? I'm kind of surprised by knight c8. I didn't think Magnus was going to back up. c5 from Vincent. I mean, his clock is bleeding for a middle game, right? He's 5 minutes on c5. That's a quarter of your time, you know? Move 18 of this game, by the way. Magnus's knight on f4 is great, yeah. But like Magnus's problem are these rook and queen are very bad over on this side of the board, right? So his king can get attacked and squished on the c file. Rook c3 from Fabi. Okay, so if you trade queens, he's going to come over here and pressure this point. Right, he neither traded the queens nor gave way. He found the fourth way. Rook here. Dang. Knight d5 might lead to a repetition. No, he'd go rook d3, c4. Knight d5, rook d3, c4. That doesn't work. Knight d5, he'd have to back up, and Javokir could repeat the offer. I mean, he could put his rook on c2 instead of c3. I don't know that that's a very big deal. The other thing is with rook c3 in the game, I guess Javokir has one other like important move we could consider. c4, grabbing space with the idea of queen takes, queen here. I guess white has rook e1 and grab the knight. And the rook can block any back rank check, and then there's time to play h3. So I don't think he's going to play c4. If you can't grab the pawn on e2, I don't think we would push c4 here, just because this pawn is so important for controlling white's pieces. This is a place where I also would like to have the time advantage for Jabok here, because you're like, every move you're evaluating new strategic situations. It's very, very a difficult game from a strategic standpoint. The Keymer versus Magnus game, the strategy is super clear. It's just a bunch of little calculations of skirmishing. Takes with the bishop, not the knight? What on earth? What kept his knight at home? Vinny, the knight has to go in front. What? The knight has to go in front. I guess he doesn't want Magnus to trade the bishop for it? Because he doesn't know how to break this castled position with the bishop? So he wants to ensure that he gets the knight there after trading pieces. But if you wanted that, Vincent, if you wanted the knight on c5 without a trade, then play here first, right? Knight takes, and then c5. That'll get you your knight on c5. Why would you move the bishop multiple times like this? You're leaving me confused. I'm in the dark. I don't like it. But notice, for all that, I have not downgraded his evaluation. I have stubbornly left this position evaluated as white is winning. You guys see, that's not just me forgetting. I've thought about it several times. I've thought several times as it got messier, as Magnus played h5, as I found little annoying tactical details here and there. I thought several times, like, oh, should I just say Vincent's better? Not commit myself to he's winning. Just say he's better, but it's messy. You know, it's hard to keep Magnus under control. They do cross, they do. But I need, like, you know, 20 cc's of water and 20 calories to do this full 4 a.m. broadcast. I can't just power myself off of air anymore like when I was younger. So anyway, folks, it's deliberate. I have stuck with this evaluation that white is winning. I still believe white is winning. Black piece is passive. Space from the d-pawn. God, if only you could make arrows on this board. Black piece is passive. The space from the d-pawn. Play on the c-file towards the king in this area. Brutal. Brutal position. Sindarov's still thinking after rook c3, and I'm going to quickly check on the 5th through 8th place matches. So Nodirbek, after 20 minutes, played h4. Yeah, Asher, something's wrong with this one window. You see, in the other window, I can make arrows and highlight with my mouse. On this one here, with no mouse nor anything, can I do it? And that holds for, you see these, anything in this set of tabs. You have to double click, and then you can draw one arrow, and then you can't draw a second one. Weird bug that's happened to this window, but I don't want to redo my whole screen capture and everything, you know what I mean? With new windows and everything, mid thing. I made it like slightly more complicated to save space for everything. I cut out all this black space between the board and the clocks. So it's actually not one screen capture, it's 3 screen captures glued together. over here that I lined up pixel by pixel. So I'm living without arrows on this board. I don't know. Okay, so after 20 minutes, he plays this h4 move, which took us less than 2 seconds to know was the right plan for white. Against the bishop versus knight. I don't know for sure if you need to do this. You know, maybe I would have played g5 here. I just knew that I would play h4 on the previous move. He was obviously planning ahead further than one move. One of the differences between Nodirbek and myself, I look one move ahead, and he's probably looking like 5 to 7 moves ahead around here. Okay, so he gets the bishop versus knight, which is reasonable. He twirls this knight towards d6 to contest the e-file, but not in time. Firouzja is able to trade off some pieces here. And everything comes off. They go to the endgame. White still has the advantage, of course, in the endgame. Very logical play. He grabs some space over here. That's where he's got his pawn majority. Also, you know, he wants to attack these pawns at some point, right? If this pawn ever comes up, now he always has the theme of trading this way to make a pass pawn really far away from the knights. So this b4 move quasi-freezes Firouzja's queen side. And then he's going to want to just continue growing that space advantage. I don't know if it's a draw or a win. If I had to put my money down on something, I would say, no, I wouldn't know. It's right in between, honestly. Right smack between a draw and a win. Sindarov's made some move. Let's have a quick look. G5. Dang. Intimating he's going to like do this and savage your king even while there's a queen trade on the table. But he's saying, like, if you hesitate too long, at some point maybe he'll play c4, give you the b pawn, and then play g4. Just like a madman. Whew! Saying rook c3 only improved your position so much, you know, are you going to trade queens now? I would think e4 for Fabi. That would be my strategic goal over here, first thought, but let's keep looking at our other games. So Nodirbek Firouzja. He can't even play f5 without losing a pawn. The king can't approach the game much because this knight is covering these squares. It's looking pretty tough to figure out what Firouzja does next. You definitely don't want to touch any pawns on the queen side. That just makes things worse and worse over here where you're worse. You would like to centralize your king or advance f5, and I don't see how to do either. So that means we need to reposition one of the knights, but this one's defending the g6 pawn and the c6 pawn. Okay, so we're not touching this one. That means the king can't get into the middle. Oh, that's pretty brutal. There's real pain here for Firouzja. On the surface, it just looks like an endgame where you could say, yeah, you know, maybe the bishop's a bit better than the knight. Then you start getting into it and you're like, oh, this knight on d6 is a problem. Because we can't actually like push it out and it's keeping our king from centralizing. There's a wall, which I can't show. But it's e8, e7, f7. It's a wall that the black king can't get through. So maybe he's going to activate his king towards g5 in order to do something. King f8. Where are you going, mate? King f8. I don't know where Firouzja's going. I actually completely do not see how to play this endgame from the black side. Fabi plays rook e1. Okay, that's pretty nice. Now he doesn't have to worry about queen takes e2 after something like c4. And, the rook is well placed if he plays e3 or e4 at some point here. Even if black plays g4 and takes on f3. It was a reasonable move from Fabi. He's quite good at positions like this from both sides. Strategic, deep strategic battles between bishops and knights. A forte of Fabi's from both sides. Okay, easy move for Nodirbek. He plays a4. It's very easy to find moves for him, Many, many good moves for white. I'm going to check on Naka and Gukesh very briefly here. They're in this endgame. Oh, God. Look at that. Pawn on h7. It's just literally dead right there. And he hasn't finished development yet. Move 23, deep in the ending. I guess the knight had to come back to get there. Ay, ay, ay. Well, black's down a full pawn here. But the question is black completely dead, right? And I don't know for sure if we should move the evaluation to winning for white, because white only has pawns on one side of the board. So it's not easy to win an endgame just because you're up one pawn if it's all on one side of the board. Not easy at all. So he challenges this knight. If Gukesh takes, part of me wonders if he even plans to bring this knight here. Check on the king. King can't go to c7 because of knight e6. If the king comes to d7, then maybe after rook h7 you lose the a pawn. That's enough for him to win. And if the king goes here, then you throw in knight f5 going after d6, rook d7, and now let's say rook h7, trying to win the d6 pawn. So I have this feeling like there might be some tactical juice here for Naka with knight d4. So Gukesh might choose to move the knight and not take. But that will allow white to play d5 and cramp the black king more, right? I don't know where I should go, but let's say I go here for argument's sake, just to make a move. And then I throw this check for white. That's kind of cramping this situation here a bit. But it's true, if I do this too soon, black trades all the rooks. And it's a limited pawn advantage here. Maybe I can put more pressure with bishop f4 first. But then there's these pieces emerge, and there's knight e4, there's rook g2, and suddenly there's stuff. So, it's not 100% done and dusted for Gukesh, but definitely a 2-result position, meaning Naka can only win or draw. He can't lose this endgame. And a very big advantage, on the borderline of winning. Okay, Naka's time is running, so Gukesh has played a move. He played knight c4, similar to knight f3, right? He's not letting Naka's knight into d4 because of the tactics. Oh, and you can't take on h7 yet because of rook g5. I wonder, knowing Gukesh, if against d5 he even intends to play king b5 just to keep this move here from being possible because of the hanging piece. Rook a7 would be a fancy way to try and play this endgame, but before you can checkmate black, black actually counterattacks you here, takes on b2 with the knight, and wins. Okay, so knight c4 on the board. Yeah, I'm not going to say that Gukesh is dead yet, but obviously struggling. Essentially down a pawn. In the Firouzja game, he challenges the bishop here with the idea that if you bring up your king and he takes and takes, now you don't have that bishop that was attacking these pawns, so that frees up black to start playing the game again, right? And you know, you threaten c3 and you threaten knight b4, and it gets very intricate. I mean, maybe white has like a surprise tactical win here with b5. But even there, black has, you know, king e7 and all kinds of moves we have to consider. And, you know, I'm not sure about even this line, right? Because this is the main idea of my b5 move, right? Sacking my c-pawn with check is some line of this sort. And white has some winning chances here. But, you know, even this, I don't know if white can pull it off. Limited pawns left with which to try and win that endgame. So, yeah, basically this knight d5 move would be very tricky for white to handle. More likely, he's going to want to keep his bishop on the board. So he has to pick whether he wants to target c6 or g6, right? Falls back this way. And Nodirbek keeps most of his advantages this way. The knight could technically move to d5 now to try and get the king in. But again, there's going to be b5 trying to win material on this diagonal. And we should be aware that king e7 is not always a solution because of the knight going that direction, right? Oh, Firouzja found something to play pretty quickly here. 5 minutes on the bishop g2 versus bishop d3 choice for Nodirbek here. Bishop g2 and quickly knight f7 trying to trade that piece off. Okay. White's not pumped about trading, but also not pumped about retreating. If you're going to retreat, you want to tag the f-pawn because we all love time. Everybody's a fiend. Knight e4 is the choice for Nodirbek. There's no second time control, so he's got his 7 minutes and then a 30-second increment to play out this whole endgame. Black could play king g7 or f5. I think ultimately, you know, you're more or less happy to trade a pawn on the king side as Firouzja. Make your passer, trade a pawn, you know, then move your remaining pieces all over to the queen side to just defend that area. So I would expect f5 here. If I'm black, if I'm either color, I would be expecting black to play f5. If I'm black, I would play it myself. And I'm going to go check on Vincent and Magnus again now that we've gone around the horn and seen all the positions. Magnus played g6. Vincent traded, got his king out of the way. Now Magnus comes to this file, and the knight appears on its triumphant c5 square. Vincent trades Magnus's pride and joy on f4. Magnus brings a new piece to d4. Man, you just can't contain this guy. What does he want to do? Knight e6 here? Now with g5 and rook e1 thrown in, Sindarov makes another motion towards, you know, maybe a draw offer here with pushing the rook back, and then he could go back to e7 with his knight. Or there's other things he could do, but, you know, this e4 move is going to be very strong in a moment. So my first thought is that he would go back. Is c4 committal? after f5 takes. Probably this endgame, huh? You're wondering, is it committal for white to play c4? Mildly committal, but it is white's plan, is to just keep grabbing more space on the queen side. So white probably would do it in general. But, you know, let's say black played f5 and we traded and traded. Let's say we play king d3 now to protect this pawn, and black plays like king e7. This would be the kind of position, right, where white could maybe go start thinking about playing c4. And I think, yeah, that would be totally possible as the next move for white here. There's other maneuvers possible as well before advancing c4, but c4 is not like committal in a bad way. You know, it doesn't hurt white's position or take away some major option that I can see. I think he could definitely do it. All right, so here we are, knight b5 coming in. You would think that Vincent would want to put his knight on e6 before black's knight gets to d4, right? So he'd be ready with this. So the most obvious move here is knight e6. And knight e6 also has the idea of maybe playing a4, right? Like, depending where black goes with the rook, you could maybe play a4 here. Trying to take on c7 if the knight, when the knight moves, right? Knight d4. Takes, takes, takes. And this is the problem with not checkmating Magnus. You get to a rook ending like this, and you don't believe you could beat him, right? Nobody does. Nobody believes they can beat Magnus in this kind of position. Oh, yeah. Knight b5. Queen c4 played. I am going to downgrade this to white is better, but I really don't know by how much anymore. It just seems like some of white's advantage got traded off here. Somewhere along the way. Good afternoon, Wavelino. I would love to have any psychological advantage, but yeah, being so good that people know that they can't beat you is more or less an unbeatable psychological advantage. You know, knowing that you have to just absolutely, you know, beyond any question of a doubt, checkmate somebody, that you can't win any advantageous endgame against them. Brutal. It's a heavy, heavy weight. So against knight d4, what does Vincent have in mind? I don't even know. Maybe knight e6 there? Making this pass pawn? But honestly, pawn doesn't look that strong to me. I don't see an attack with knight b7 or knight a6. I don't see really the value of like an exchange sack, because best you do is at some point your opponent can always sack it back. So I don't know really what he's going to do against knight d4. Black might even be able to undefend c7, and I don't know for sure that white has a breakthrough there either, right? So you have to kick this knight, and then you do your thing. Okay, that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. It's hard to resist once a queen comes in to c7. I mean, for argument's sake, we could calculate it out a little bit more. But yeah, everything collapses once white gets in. Magnus has played rook c8, reinforcing c7 to the max. That frees up his queen to come start, you know, harassing and pecking away at your kingside. Ay, ay, ay. Fabi might be about to play e4, folks. Oh, Asher, you'd seen this rook c4 move? Nice. Oh, man. These are so good, these Balsan Contessa. Ay, ay, ay. That was great. He even has this move like rook e4 in some situations, right? I mean, now I think the big deal would be e4, but in this position, Black even has to keep their eye on this rook e4 move, right? Oh, that was strong, rook c4. I didn't even see that square for the rook. It just didn't even come to me. I mean, Sindarov's played great this game, but I feel like he's just not managed to impose his strategic goal here with the knight. And now Fabi's on the move, you know, just starting to kick him back and stuff. Achieves e4. So at least we were right that that was something that Fabi would want to do. I think that the knight's going to retreat. I think this is just unequivocally bad if you open this file for white. So I think Black's got to play some kind of retreating knight move, like knight c7 or I don't know what. Let's say we do this. Let's say white tries to take everything. We kick them. They come here. We do this. This. We push past. If rook here, and it looks like they've trapped their own rook. But there's a4. Okay, but d5 is like pretty reasonable period with or without this move. Just d5. Leaving that pawn on d4 actually proves very effective here for Black. I guess there's tactics though. I mean, like white can take, and how do I recover my pawn and untangle this whole thing? this brilliant move, I guess. If t6, that walks into knight a6, trapping the rook. Because I defended my b pawn through there. Hey, E-Bobster, I agree with you. But they've hard-coded the color of the board. It's terrible. Everybody agrees with you. Well, actually, there was one person who said that they liked the black and white. But yeah, it's rough. It's rough for all of us. We have no other way to watch the games that we can figure out. I'll give you the link here. If you can find a way to if you can find a way to make it look nicer, let me know. Yeah, I think Keymer, it's slowly slipped from him, you know. Oh my gosh. Javokir traded on e3. Oh, he's got to be worse then, right? He's got to be worse. Man, it took forever to understand what's going on in this Fabi Sindarov game, just the strategic complexity. A4 from Vincent, knight d4, g5. What? Huh? G5. I don't know what that's about, but apparently it was about something deep because Magnus didn't take it. Just played rook cd8, which is like super mysterious as well. I thought he wanted to reinforce c7. Rook cd8. What is going on? What? Anybody got any insight into what happens here? Vincent Saxon exchange, maybe? And pushes e5? Oh no, hang on. Let's keep your brain on, David. Let's keep your brain on. Holy cannoli. You see Vincent in a whole new light when you find variations like that. And realize that that's just like, you know, a fragment of what he's inventing. Right, I also saw in this position that you could play e6, but I think the d6 move was even more destructive, actually, Asher. Because this threatens to go like d7, which would just end the game, right? See, like, I'll just play a move to show you how destructive d7 is. I play this, the rook has to move. Now I could go e6 and just lock this in and it's all over, or I could do a tiny calculation, come up with knight a6, queen c7, right? Just the end of it all. And as you saw, after d6, this line is straight up winning for white. So just direct. I mean, if black can't take that d pawn, then this move is a kill. Whereas e6, your threat is not as hardcore, right? Like your opponent could do something like this and then just give back the exchange that you sacked. Good luck here. Right? This is our ragtag heavy piece position against Magnus. But d6. And to play g5, Vincent had to, like, see all the way to the end of this line, I think. He had to see all the way to here to go for it. I mean, maybe he could see that his position's probably good with, like, e6. He doesn't necessarily have to find, like, rook c7 its mate. Like, he could stop somewhere around here and be like, okay, it's probably good for white. But, I mean, he had to get pretty far along that variation to have played g5. And, like, where did he even get the idea that he wanted to play g5, right? Where does that even come from? Vincent, you're impressing me more and more lately. More and more. That game against Prague at the end of the Wake on Zay, and now this g5 here. You know, when you beat Firouzja last round, I was like, well, it was pretty... The first game was pretty easy. Firouzja kind of just handed it to you on a plate. But this, g5, gf6, oh, now there's some more stuff going on, right? Now he always has this theme, folks, right? It's just like the mobile pawns. That's always a theme now. In addition to themes of, like, you know, you go knight d3, right? And then your opponent, whatever, defends e5, and you go knight takes, queen takes, and you take, right, with an extra pawn. Okay, it's not like 100% that you win that endgame, but winning a pawn is still something. So... g5, incredible move, actually. Yeah, I guess that's right, Asher. He'd been thinking so much about these exchange sacks, even though they're just not good. But that's also a difference, even there, right? Like, yes, that's how reciprocal thinking works, but, like, a lot of people would look at this exchange sack and be like, no, it's just not in the position, right? It's just not in the position. They would just say it's not good. But he, like, realizes, like, oh, if this f-pawn were distracted, then there's juice. I mean, that's... I think most people look at the exchange sack and say, yeah, it's just not on the cards. It's not in the table, you know? And you can look at these ideas of, like, exchange sack followed by knight e6, which I was looking at somewhat, or knight e6 first. And you just sort of conclude these heavy piece endings, the simplified ones. They just don't look like you've got the ingredients for winning a game. You know, you've got one isolated passer that can get rounded up. It's almost as weak as it is strong. You know, you're just not winning these positions. But that he's like, yeah, but maybe if g5, oh man, that's impressive to me. Now he plays a weird little simplifying move, though. That's not very impactful, Vincent, is it? Well, we got to trust him if he's so good. But what is that about? It doesn't... On the surface of it, it doesn't threaten black severely. But I guess black maybe has to give up the f-file, which is something. Because if the queen came here, it would give up c7, right? So knight a6 would win with then queen c7. You can also play knight a6 before trading rooks if you're worried about queen a6, right? You could do this here first. This is more precise. I should do it like this, just as a rule. Because we don't want the queen taking on a6. We want the pawn taking so the king can't have any shelter from our pieces. Oh god, the queen's defending that rook. That's annoying. This might all be a blunder. I thought he had that. There's a lot of variations here between knight e6, knight a6, knight b7. But actually, none of them are like clearing up as an obvious win to me here. Okay, Merle's asked, is queen b4 a threat? Even maybe before this move, right? It should be considered. Oh, before this move, queen b4, rook b6. So only once these pieces are tied up like that, maybe now queen b4. Nice, Merles. That could also have been the answer to rook f1, queen f7. You threaten mate and the rook can't come over. Because rook b6, you just have queen b6. And win the endgame. Okay. Then there's rook over here. And then again, queen b4. Just killer. If this rook comes over to b6, you can take with check now. Right? Asher, there's a knight on d4. Right? You're trying to play queen c6 check brilliantly, right? But there's a knight that can take it. C6, though, you say, Merles. Yeah, but aren't we also looking through at this in some way? We should have some kind of a tactic here, no? Well, I mean, at minimum, we'd just take this pawn, you know? I was thinking we would somehow, like, take on f8, but we can't. We can't. But we can simply, you know, trade, and then, you know, just keep playing here with the extra pawn. And the king has been opened quite a bit here. You know, you'll start threatening like queen d8, queen a5, queen d8. Like, you've just got always tactics when the king is that open. It's just like a perpetual tactical element. So I think that rules out rook f8 and queen f7. More or less, black needs to take on f1 here. Not a move I would consider either, Merles. No, he's played multiple moves here that I would not have considered, and he still has the advantage. You know, I don't know if he's gotten the maximum out of this. I'm reluctant to say it's winning at this point, but yeah, he's keeping some kind of pressure on, and he's finding unusual moves as well. So Fabi threatens bishop d6, and Sindarov just gives up on his pawn structure. Looks for counterplay. Fabi centralizes the queen, sensing the desperation. d5 brings the rook over here. But okay, he did pass up his chance to eat any of these pawns. I don't know if Sindarov had for sure a counter. So let's just have a quick look. I mean, this is like a safe move from Fabi, but what if he takes? Okay, so first of all, black can trade, and against bishop f8, f2 is sound. Because of this. Oh no, there's rook e4. Oh my god. Maybe we can do that with the queen still on f7. Play d5 here. But then rook e4, white might come out up a piece, right? Okay, so maybe we play d5 first, but then there's rook f4. Okay, let's try another attack. Let's chase the king all the way around and sack our knight. Rook f4! Ah, check! We can't take this. Okay, we gotta throw in d5 to block that diagonal. King here. And I guess this is fine-ish for black. Like, this is hanging, and this is hanging, and this king's on this weird square. This should be okay for black somehow. maybe like equalish. I could imagine the white king like taking here. You know, king f8, rook f4, king here. Just charge with your king. Check. Here. Check. I mean, who knows who wins, right? Oh, there was the queen covering h4. Sorry, excuse me. I cheated there for white. Okay, that's insanity. But let's just say that's probably sound for black. So probably after gf, white takes back. But then, what's black's counterplay for this? What's the move? My instinct is like knight e4. No, there's rook takes e4. And then our queen can't go. Be aware that here there's like this kind of a move too. Check. Not sure. I'm hanging something, Merles? You're hanging the queen? Okay. Where did I hang the queen? Oh, with rook e4. Oh, okay. Knight e4, okay. In any case, this is not going to work, though, because of the queen on b3. Because my plan had been to, like, take this pawn, right? But there's going to be this move. So my thing is still not going to work to rook e4 at some point here. Yeah, there is this, like, b5 theme that generally, I think, makes white play queen b5. Then at least the queen's not on our king. But I don't know how this works out for black. It still looks weird. I don't see a clear move for black that makes up for that pawn on d6. I mean, black could always just say, hey, it's a pawn sack. I don't have to sack a rook just because I sacked a pawn. Black could play a move like this, and the idea could be, you know, rook e6, and just that this king is exposed. It could have been that. But if that's the case, then Fabi was definitely being a little bit safe by playing queen d3 versus grabbing the pawn, because now Sindarov plays d5, and, you know, he's not going to lose a pawn. He's got his position sort of covered here. And we're going to get a longer endgame. And white's advantage is actually feels a little bit small to me here. A bit small to me here. I mean, it's a lot to keep up with as they start getting low on time. On the other board, Magnus gives up the F file. And Vincent looks like he's maybe going to double on the F file instead of using the C file. Magnus's king gets in better position to the knight. Now there are far fewer crashing tactics. Knight on d4 is amazing. You know, and the position's slowed down. White's advantage is small-ish. Probably. Oh, and against this idea of knight d3, I guess there's always queen e4 now. That's because the pawn finally moved to g5. That wasn't available several moves ago when I talked about knight d3. Knight d3 was a theme earlier with the idea of taking on e5 and d4, but now that Magnus had time for this little, not very important, but an improving move nonetheless, g5, now knight d3 is off the table. So this is their live position. Vincent down to 1 minute. And it's a 3 result position as well, I will say, right? Like, just because Vincent has been on top throughout the game, I mean, it's been trending against him. And it's just fully messy, right? The white king does not have very good pawn cover since Vincent played a4. There he does switch the f-file as I expected. But by now, you know, he's not even really threatening rook f7, queen h2, right? And before you can take on c7, or as you take on c7, there's mate on b2. So he's not... It's just not clear, right? It's very messy and tactically open. And Magnus, he's a great calculator. He's not as famous for it because he's got other skills that nobody has, and there are other people who calculate. But Magnus is a very alert calculator. He notices tiny slips. He does. He does. All right. Sindarov also defending like a boss after, he's up against Fabi. Fabi got an e4, and Sindarov still got himself some kind of a position here. It's still so tricky to play this knight versus bishop imbalance. This is just an epic, epic game these guys are having. Very, very original territory. You would like never get this structure in normal chess, basically. You would never get this. Sindarov either had some brilliant possibility if Fabi took the pawn, or Fabi just played one move that was slightly too safe, and a big chunk of his advantage slipped. I would still slightly favor him. Bishop versus knight, the possibility of like this A pawn at some point getting going, B6, that's a little bit of a target. But black is pretty strong and compact. It's still tricky. You're still trying to figure out where do you get your counterplay, what do you attack, it's so intricate. But yeah, I still favor Fabi a little bit in this position. And not just on the board, but also even if you take into account the extra 2 minutes for Sindarov with the 30-second increment, I still believe in Fabi here. Magnus continues to expand that kingside pawn, just getting it closer to queening in case he's able to grab the h-pawn at some point. Yeah, and Vincent is just down under a minute and can't come up with like a concept anymore. The game is just so tactical. Every move you just need to be calculating. It is exhausting. Terrible to be in a middle game with nothing but a 30-second increment. Terrible. I have accustomed myself to playing end games off of just the increment, and I feel reasonably comfortable with that now. But middle games, no sir. No, sir. Oh, Merle says there's maybe this interesting possibility that you go rook f7 anyway. Black goes here. And then you play rook f2, defending b2, and keeping the attack on c7. I guess an issue is that since rook c7 is not like a big attacking move or something, maybe Magnus just... keeps his queen tagging this rook. At best, you're trying to, like, repeat here. I also considered g3 for Magnus here, which would be an exciting move, but I decided that after takes, rook behind, passed pawn, you're not going to create a miracle here with this queen sack. Oui, tu veux quelque chose? Tu peux entrer. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a? Ah oui? Oh zut. Bah c'était noir. Alors...
calcul. Si tu aides maman avec ses lignes, ce sera plus facile pour elle de te faire un petit déjeuner, n'est-ce pas? S'il te plaît, aide maman, c'est un moment très difficile là. Ou habille-toi ou quelque chose, chérie. Maman va être désespérée là. Tu sais, c'est super. Quoi? Oui. Mais tu peux aller demander à maman de mettre le chauffage dans la chambre comme le déjeuner, ok? Mais viens sur ton truc et va lui aider un peu dans cette situation.
No, it's too much, you know what? Stop it!
Sans cesse et elle essaie de te préparer la nourriture, c'est pas juste pour maman. Mais c'est juste pas possible.
Oh, you're not doing this shit again! Oh, honey, you don't need to have breakfast. Go away! Go away!
Tu vas essayer d'aider maman avec sa voiture.
Maybe if you let me where you can sleep, I'd be nicer. Go away!
Whew. Sorry, folks. I know it's an incredibly dramatic moment in the game to have to step away, but our dog keeps vomiting in the kids' room. That's tough for them. Oh my god! Magnus has locked away Vincent's file.
If I give her the big bowl, she'll touch it and I'll throw the whole thing away.
Oh my god. I mean, I think that game's pretty close to equal, honestly. I think it's pretty close to equal now. The Keymer-Carlson game. Let's see what's happening here. Javokir goes after the weak light square. We get a pawn trade. Whew! Heck of a game here between these guys. Why did the knight have to move to attack the f-pawn? Maybe just to be able to double rooks if white played king g2 in this kind of a situation. I mean, Sindarov could have also slowed things down here, right? Defending this pawn. There's no obvious reason that he had to offer it. But he's just like pressing, you know? He's like believes in this because now he's got the light squares to fight on this side, but it's a heavy commitment because that pawn's going. I don't know if any of us know who's better in this endgame. Rook f2 defending the h-pawn. Rook b6, rook d6. I don't know where this guy's going. Got to keep the rook on g8 defended so you don't blunder rook f3 at some point. Magnus down to 2 minutes himself. Rook e4 from Sindarov against a5. He wants to get his rook behind that pawn, but you would expect rook a1 or b3 from Fabi here. b3, maybe Sindarov can just trade some pawns. Slash get his own c-pawn going. I think rook a1 is the most obvious. Then the king is like the most abandoned possible, and he has to look for some kind of a tactic. Goes a5. Okay. Rook a4 looks pretty okay for black. It comes in really fast from Javokir. Javokir, by the way, showed great resilience in 2 bad endgames yesterday and the day before against Hikaru. Like, he showed that like every phase of his game is up to snuff, ready to be evaluated by these top 10 players. It's kind of his first super tournament. Oh, Fabi drives the pawn to a6. Rook f6. That looks like a simple solution for Sindarov. Where is your a-pawn going, Fabi? What does he have going on here? I see something like rook b7 coming to trade the a-pawn for maybe the d-pawn. I don't think that Fabi can hold that pawn, and without it, he's not going to have much of an advantage, is he? Like rook b7, rook a6, rook d7 for argument's sake. Black looks fine, right? I would just throw one variation on the board real quick. We see Fabi thinking, which I think indicates like he didn't fully want or plan for this. If black, like, you know, looks at this, either with rook a2 or rook b6. I think black looks decently nice here. All right, he's played rook b8 check. Okay, the instinct is you'd rather centralize your king here, but it could be some tactical detail with rook here. But it shouldn't be bad to bring your king to e6. I'm game for that. I'll give white a check in exchange for my king coming to e6. I'm wrong. None of us can keep up with these guys anymore. Nobody out there who could do it. Well, maybe like Danya. He might be doing some of the commentary on the official site. He can maybe keep up with this. But I'm a little bit behind the pace at this point. Rook d6, queen e3. The king will have to find a new square. Vincent still on 30 seconds. Magnus on 60 of them. Sindarov sitting on a cushy 5 minutes. Clicking over here for a second, Nodirbek and Firouzja. The game was eventually a draw. Rook b8 check, king here, and he goes after one of the d pawns. Yeah. Okay. So if he gets this d pawn, then these pawns are less good, kind of split. He gets the tempo on the knight. So that would say you might have to play like rook f5, but if you do, he comes back. This king should have come into the center, Javokir. I think. What do I know? Ay, ay, ay. Ay, 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 ay. Intense. He's got a few minutes to do a little calculating. Well, Asher, I think he overlooked rook f6. If I followed what happened here correctly with Fabi, like when he played a5, he'd overlooked this move, and then here he stopped and thought for a while, like, oh shoot, what am I doing? So I don't think this was part of the plan up to here. Okay, this is the live position after rook d1. Sindarov thinking, basically if he takes here, the knight's hanging, the pawn's hanging, he's kind of semi-blundered it. He'd have to throw in a check and then like whip up some counterplay with the knight, but he's down a pawn, and there's rook h5 check if he goes for anything too aggressive. So I think he's like inclined to defend the pawn. Yes, I got that one right. He goes rook f5, so Fabi can come back to b6, and the battle continues. I don't think Sindarov needs to capture this pawn. As long as he's got his rook behind it, it's basically not that big a threat. Okay, I mean, you have to be sort of good to handle the situation, but I think it's correct, like, to hold his position together and prioritize rook f5 and knight f6 versus taking this pawn. I think that's, like, for sure correct. All right, what's going on here? We go knight e6, c6, challenging the pawn, queen a3 with e4 and d5 and everything hanging, and Magnus sacks the exchange with seconds on the clock. Could Vincent do it? If you get distracted by this e-pawn, Maggie, then the knight or the pawn is going to fall. I mean, he wants to play queen e4, and he will at the last second play queen e4. Nope. Rook to g8, leaving the g-pawn hanging. He's lost. He's lost. I don't know why he couldn't bring his queen into the middle of the board, but he has lost the game. Oh, I can't even upgrade it to winning faster than he resigns. Wow. Suddenly, out of the blue, Magnus runs out of time and can't hold it together. We predict these moves on Fabiano's board. Were there any other moves? No, he played rook c8 and he just gave up. It was such a give up of a move. Rook g4. I mean, he wouldn't even let us change the evaluation or put the move on the board. Why was this so done? Oh, because there's still rook f3. Oh, my lord. Magnus must have overlooked queen a3. He must have just blundered the move or something right here. I don't know how else to explain what just happened. And why wouldn't he just Did he have nowhere to retreat this piece? This would be the only square. And then there's this, wrecking his king. But he doesn't have to resign yet. Oh, it's terrible, though, what just happened there. He self-inflicted this, it seems, with c6. Amazing. Amazing upset result for Vincent. And it was a tough battle. He had to show resilience all the way through. We've got Sindarov and Fabi in a fantastically complicated endgame. The bishop, quote-unquote, activates, but it means this weakness needs to be covered by the rooks. Black's got moves like c4 and d4 to consider right here. d4 just to get the outpost for the knight, to get a passed pawn moving. c4 to leave e3 as a weakness that we're trying to win. I think it's pretty close to balanced. I have it marked as white is better. And that's kind of basically from a practical perspective. Like the outside passed a pawn, the bishop versus knight. But I think it's very, very, very close to very close to equal, the Sindarov endgame. Oh, Asher says the rook's headed to a3, not c3. So against this move, Asher says, you know, maybe he doesn't just like hang on to his e-pawn. Maybe he goes here, 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 check. You got to be very careful where you go with your king here, though, Asher. Very careful. I know you're about to queen a pawn. All the more reason to be careful. I see two different maiden ones over here. And even over here, it looks like we're sacking the bishop to maybe queen this pawn. Okay, but look, here's something completely insane, Asher. c3, queens, c2. And I think black might be winning. I don't know if it makes any sense. But there's potential for absolutely madness in that line with c4. Okay, Sindarov plays a simpler move on the surface, just going for the e3 square for the knight. Queen c8, rook c4, right, Asher? In my mad line. You think white wins? Why does white win? Nobody knows. Absolute madness, right? I'd seen queen c8, and even here I have this knight e3 resource, so you don't get my knight. And if you go to the back rank, I queen with check. I think you have to go to f3 for tactical reasons, and then maybe you get a checkmate or a draw here. I don't know. Anyway, they're not going down that crazy road, and it's a blitz off, so we got to keep seeing what's going. Fabi makes a different flight square for the king because, remember, the back rank mates on f1, king h3, rook h5 was very... Bishop h4 was very precarious. Oh, there's the move g5. I played knight f5, but maybe g5, right? You want me to make Fabi's board bigger? Is that what it means, Rafal? You want this board bigger over here? Okay, black gets two rooks behind the a-pawn. Is that enough to keep the a-pawn under control for Sindarov? Probably. Probably. But, you know, Fabi can counterattack these pawns here. I'm not sure my eval is accurate. Let's maybe say it's about equal here. No, it's never completely equal, right? Because, like, even here with bishop e1, if you take on a6... right, and Fabi takes on d4, you still got a B pawn against a knight with the bishop, you know? I guess knight c2 would be dead drawn. Knight c2 would be truly drawn if he plays that. I've got the live board below me. You can see them actually headed towards that at the moment, possibly. Rook d4 played, knight c2. Yeah, it's dead equal. He's sure to play this move, right? Sure to spot it. Did your rook a3 get played, Asher? Let me see what happened. No. Oh, you're saying he could have played your rook a3 here to keep the game going? But if he played rook a3, he would have basically been risking losing this game himself mostly, right? The rook is still keeping this pawn from queening. And black starts to play like d3, bishop e1, d2. That's it for him, right?
You okay? If you don't run away, I can do a better job.
Yeah. Okay, so the game went bishop e1, knight c2, rook d1. Yeah. And then you trade on e1, play rook b6, and shake hands. I think they're done playing here, folks. We can go check if Gukesh's game is still going, but I doubt it is. But this is going to be a worthy draw between Fabi and Sindarov. A really, really great battle between these two players. Super, super hard to notice a single mistake between them. I see your comment, Prabhav. See you shouting at me there. We get the draw official here between these two. Bravo. Javokir really showing up. We could say bravo to Fabi as well, but like it's known that he's 2800 level. Sindarov is showing all the skills here, folks. All the skills. Today he had to show incredible strategic depth, navigating a complicated knight versus bishop situation against Fabi, one of the best in the world in those situations. And then all the way through this intricate endgame, incredible. And he even had that extra 2-3 minutes to spare in case some kind of weird situation came up. So he even had a little more resource than he needed. Incredible from him. Let's go check the result of the game we have not seen. Hikaru versus Gukesh. They're still playing. It's a rook ending, and miraculously Gukesh is not down pawns. I guess he's not up pawns either, since both his pawns are hanging. Maybe he'll be down a pawn in a minute. E4. Okay, we're going to get a brief little interlude of theoretical rook endings here. Here would be my thought about this ending. I would start rook h3. This is just off the tip of the tongue, folks. Like king c5, rook here. I would go into this passive defense. And the point is to just sit here with the king on c7 and the rook here. And yeah. I don't think white can make much progress. And yeah, you just keep the rook on one of these two ranks, 7th or 6th ranks. So your king can't get pushed back. Okay, we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. E4, rook e4, rook h3 now. Check. King b6, trying to maybe hold on to his pawn. I mean, my understanding is you can do this, and if they take, this is Philidor's position, right? So rook e6. You know, I would say now maybe like king here. Rook check, I'd come here. And you can draw this king and pawn ending the moment white takes the pawn by taking the opposition here. let's see what happens. King comes back. Check. King here. Repeating moves to put more time on his clock is Hikaru, or is he really just going to give him a draw without playing out the last moves? Okay. Okay. Somewhat lucky escape for Gukesh, and probably very skillful as well. I think that's a third repetition. It's going to take a moment to update the results, so we're going to scroll back up the game and see how he got out of that sticky situation. So let's go to where he played knight c4. And we're also going to just put the equal on here just to make clear this game's about to end in a draw. So knight c4, e5 from Naka. Takes, takes, takes. So he just creates a bunch of weaknesses. But it's a pawn sack just to create some weaknesses. Gets one pawn back. Gukesh is trying to stay active with the rooks, trying not to get passive. The knight on g8, however, is very passive. Finally gets it out. Nice. He's trying to get after the a2 pawn here. Yeah, and he cleans it up. Okay. Good job. Good job, Gukesh. Game is officially drawn. So, yeah, survival from Gukesh. And yeah, the shocking result today. The one decisive game. Keymer. Vincent Keymer. The young German. Oh, a major underdog, you know. Picked first by Firouzja as the most delectable opponent. Well, Firouzja comes away with indigestion and ends up in the 5th through 8th place bracket. Keymer gets a match in the semifinals with Magnus, and then today against Magnus he scores a surprising win in a time scramble, just a back and forth of tactics in a completely random 3-result position. Incredible result. And tomorrow we're going to see Magnus storming back with white, you know, in this like super must-win situation. The other 3 games might be a bit more reasonable since those matches started with draws. You know, the players don't have to go absolutely bonkers, but Magnus is going to be coming to tear him apart tomorrow. Vincent should enjoy the win today. Take a nice walk. I hear this Weissenhaus place is kind of like a spa, so maybe you could enjoy some time in the spa tomorrow morning to be calm before the match. Oh man, that's incredible. If he could be the one to take Magnus down, if he could be the one to do it. And Magnus definitely had an uneven day today. There were moments where you could feel that he was like this wounded lion, and it was like intense and scary how he was clawing his way out of a lost position. But I mean, any way that you manage to win a game against Magnus is just, you know, bravo, period. You know, anybody who ever manages it. So, yeah, exciting day of chess, and that's a wrap for us for today. Thank you everybody for hanging out, sharing your comments and thoughts and interesting questions. Yeah, let's send off a raid to the official channel where they might have an interview for you all to watch. So that would be Raid Chess. And we'll be back tomorrow for the second game of the semifinals at 4 a.m. Pacific, 7 a.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. in Weissenhaus in Central Europe. Take care, everybody. Be well. Have a lovely day or night. We'll see you soon. And here, YouTube is the link to the official channel that I just sent them to. And it looks like they are interviewing Vincent right now. So, yeah, nice. All right, I'll see you all again soon.